46 states reporting widespread activity
as a deadly new virus sweeps through the city.
The World Health Organization declaring a global health emergency.
Once a pandemic emerges, it's really too late. All you can do is put out the fire. We're trying to get ahead of the curve and stop them before they emerge. EcoHealth Alliance is working on the ground to stand between you and the next pandemic. From our offices here in New York, we send our staff all over the world. We form alliances with local partners in every country we work in. Otherwise, we can't achieve the results we get. EcoHealth Alliance created the first hotspots map for emerging diseases, identifying the exact places on the planet where the next pandemic is most likely to emerge. So we take our science and we apply it on the ground, and we show that you can predict when the next outbreak is coming and actually prevent it. It saves lives, it saves money, and people are really grateful for that.
This program deals with devil worship and satanic beliefs. It contains explicit scenes and descriptions of violent crimes and rituals.
Americans are asking, who attacked our country?
You have declared a subliminal jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives.
And night fell on a different world.
And Iblis is thinking, I should be getting this position, not Adam, and this guy is created from dirt.
And how does the army feel about you being head of the Temple of Set?
And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but
I want you to give me power over Adam, and I want you to give me soldiers and minions and all of these things.
The people have so much to gain and have such an ulterior motive for putting me in a position I'm in. We'll never know the true facts of some of their born to the world.
And I want you to be able to give me the ability to whisper into the hearts of mankind.
And who was the grotto leader? Don't remember his name. You don't remember the name of a person who involved you in murder?
Now they speak for very high positions, yeah? Yes.
Welcome back to Subliminal Jihad, episode 88. I'm your co-host Dimitri.
I'm Khalid.
And today, we're going to dive into a topic that is, I feel like should be getting a lot more attention than it's getting right now in the mainstream press, but I can't say I'm too surprised that it isn't. Also, I was a little frustrated when I was going through editing our previous episode, which will be out by the time you hear this, episode 87, about Martin Bormann, the Nazi in exile. And I thought, damn it, what a missed opportunity that, we had this big Nazi episode in 87 and then 88 we're doing something else. But
it's probably it's good. It's kind of like Aquino not dying right on Halloween back when we thought that that had happened, that he had died on like October 30th or something. Yeah. Right?
Yeah,
that was the original thought.
Maybe. I mean, in a way, maybe Martin Bormann was actually a prelude to the 88. And maybe today's topic is not so not 88 after all.
Yeah.
Because the deeper you dive into it, you see a certain amount of chicanery going on in terms of the manipulation of the science.
Yes.
That is approaching pretty scary 88 levels, I would say. The trajectory that the global health regime has embarked on the last maybe 10 to 15 years. I'm increasingly convinced has quite directly led us to the situation that we're all living in today in the world under the endless lockdown of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Just 2 weeks. We'll just be 2 weeks.
Just 2 weeks to stop the spread. 2 weeks to stop the spread. So it's been how many months
so
now?
Crazy.
Like 20 months?
It's funny. I was just talking the other day and I had not a true sense of deja vu, but not when you really have that kind of uncanny feeling, but I kind of appreciate that I was having this kind of conversation where I was sort of expressing skepticism about the end of the sort of pandemic situation, or in that there would ever be kind of a return to life as it was before. And I was getting kind of a similar reaction where it's the scientists say, and I was it's funny because almost a whole year ago, even before I think you and I started the podcast, or maybe very shortly thereafter, I remember saying the exact same thing when the vaccines were first coming out. And, you know, just being like, I don't know, like, I just feel like I'm pessimistic, you know, about how effective they're going to be at actually ending the pandemic, and getting kind of the response of like, come on, you know, the scientists say, you know, they say all these things, but, you know, and when I kind of brought that up, you know, upon hearing it again, I was like, well, you know, it's funny because I remember hearing this a year ago about the vaccines, so it's hard for me to, you know, be optimistic, really. And, you know, what I would hear would be like, well, you know, the scientists didn't predict certain things. They didn't predict Delta. They didn't predict that people would refuse to get the vaccine. And for one, like, I feel that from, like, the research that we've done, like, for our past sort of forays into this topic, on one hand, like, I know that they did predict it. They did know that something like Delta was a distinct possibility, and they did know that people were going to refuse the vaccine. You know, like, even in Dark Winter, you know, they were saying that it would be a thing where people were going to refuse the vaccine. So that's one thing. And on the other hand, like, even if they didn't, then they should have. You know, like, there's every indication.
It doesn't take a Dr. Fauci to figure that out. It shouldn't, right?
There's every indication that, well, leaving even aside the aspect of Delta, like, I think that one of the most significant social aspects of how the pandemic has played out, and you can't really think of epidemiology or virology separately from the social. Like, that's a thing, you know. It's not like you know, despite what some people may say, we're not living in a simulation or, you know, a model in a classroom or on a computer. You know, we actually, you know, it's not like a sort of vacuum or a sterile world. Like, there are sort of social nuances and things like that need to be taken into account. You can't separate the way that, like, these diseases that are transmitted through social contact, through human interaction, are gonna pan out and behave without accounting for the social aspect. And like the idea that people really didn't account for the politicization and just, like, you know, just let it slide into this you know, this very convenient little setup where, like, it's impossible to, like, everyone is just, like, so entrenched in these, like, ideological camps, just, like, captured in these little, like, bubbles, ideological bubbles. It's really, like, the perfect, you know, outside of the conversation of, like, COVID being a bioweapon or something, which we will get into. Like,
we will get to.
You can definitely see the weaponization of, like, the culture war bullshit, like, happening. Like, if COVID's a bioweapon, like, part of the bioweapon is, like, the social manipulation, where, like, and it's like we've seen in many cases, it's dialectical, where, like, there's a manipulation of two sort of a thesis and an antithesis to create, like, a perfect synthesis to perpetuate, like, a certain desired result or status quo. But
it does sound like the Hegelian dialectic.
It's the nothing new under the sun. There's nothing new under the sun.
You get the one group afraid for their safety, and then you get the other group to give the rights away, and then etc. No, but it really does kind of feel like that. It reminds me of how there was kind of a meme going around last year, maybe more during, like, the George Floyd protests, of, like, fill in the blank is the real pandemic, you know? And even that kind of betrays the kind of logic you were talking about of looking at a, quote, pandemic as something that has inherently social like phenomenology and features to it. Yes. That it's not just like the science, you know, it's actually it's much more complex and intertangled. And you know, I share your kind of slight skepticism of some of these experts, because they do talk about things all the time about how everything's connected. One thing we'll get into today with some of the scientists we're talking about is a weird little phrase that I've seen pop up in the public health world called One Health. They all you know, one of the big guys we'll talk about today, Peter Daszak from EcoHealth Alliance, is very fond of this. And I think there's even a kind of institute at, I think, the UC Davis that is called like the One Health, Institute or whatever. And that means basically that it's not just about the health of humans. It's not just about the health of animals. It's not just about the health of the environment. There's only one health, and everything has to be taken as a whole, which is like, in a kind of broad boilerplate way, it's like, yeah, sure,
That's
like all these things
true.
are systems and everything, but I just get such like deep ecology vibes from that, which again we'll probably get to later. But it's like that, even that frame of thinking, it should, like, I don't know, I feel like more things should be occurring to these people. Instead of them being like, oops, like we failed to consider, kind of like, 9/11, where it's like, oops, we failed to consider that terrorists might hijack a plane and fly into a building. It's like literally on TV, like in novels, like it's in intelligence reports, like we're swimming in that idea.
I was thinking about that, and it's really amazing how Trump is the ultimate sigil, or the ultimate screen behind which you can make that work or make people buy that. Everything that he does in one group, in one narrative is treated as incredibly stupid and that he's just a complete idiot. So everything that nothing that he does can be calculated or and then of course on the other side there's everything he does is brilliant and some strategic genius working towards goals that have nothing to do with his real agenda or his real political goals. But on the other side it's just if Trump suspended this moratorium on gain of function research or something, and then he conveniently shut down the monitoring system for pandemics or something like that, and then he was I'm suspending this grant and something like that, it's all just he's a nativist, he's crazy, he's a bumbling fool. But maybe all this is actually directed towards something. Maybe the people telling him to do this stuff or getting him all riled up or putting him out there, it's because he's the ultimate shitcoat machine and
he really is.
An amazing performer and deceiver and just scapegoat for all this stuff.
And throughout the pandemic,
he mismanaged it so horribly. But was it mismanaged or was it perfectly managed?
Well, I mean, it's hard to think about the COVID narrative kind of playing out the way that it did without Trump in the White House throughout 2020, because his response to it, I mean, when you really look at it at the end of the day, and, if you're, say, a person who is a lockdown skeptic or even vaccine skeptic or COVID skeptic about any of these things, he kind of embodied more of a skepticism maybe than at various points than any of the Democratic governors or Biden or anybody like that. But he still did kind of go along with lockdowns and the meta narrative. He put Fauci on TV every day. He did Operation Warp Speed to get these mRNA vaccines out that are now have totally somehow flipped political allegiances. It's actually one of the only things that Trump was very gung-ho about that now is not associated with him at all, because it would be inconvenient.
I heard recently that he
to associate him with it.
Told people to get vaccinated at some rally, and even his own supporters booed him, which is really something, because
it is interesting.
A deep fanatical loyalty, in the people who attend Trump rallies, you would think, but.
But I think even that somehow that's been divorced from him, and I think that now if you hear Democrats on TV talking about it, they kind of basically they frame the development of the vaccines as a great achievement of the military medical industrial complex, essentially.
Yeah, and when at first it was the Trump vaccine, I remember Brooklyn Dad Defiant and people like that being I won't get a Trump vaccine,
right?
Yeah, that's funny. But yeah, I mean, I think a very vulgar and ultimately deranged and stupid thing that I think similar to memes about this is the real pandemic or whatever, that I think kind of actually did hit on something and may even have been a shitcoat in its own way somehow, is that Breitbart article that people were passing around, and it was ludicrous and it was funny, there's a lot of mental gymnastics going around, but I feel whatever sort of stirred the instinct behind the article, and the premise of it basically was, I don't remember who wrote it, and it doesn't it doesn't really make any sense the way that it was formulated, but I feel like whatever stirred it in this author, there is something real behind it, which is that he was saying, the Democrats their plan is that, they are trying to make the vaccine seem like, so, they're trying to push it on you and trying to be obnoxious about it because they know that, like, you won't get it. Like, they know that if, like, they, do all this vaccine, like, they try to make you get the vaccine and do all these mandates and stuff, they know you won't get it. And the vaccine, it actually does save lives. So they want you to not get it and die.
Yeah, exactly. It's a trap.
Yeah, but I actually feel like there's something, like, not in that formulation, which, of course, is, like, very risible, but there's something to that, I think. There's some way that, like, this politicization of the virus and of the response to it, like, actually does almost seem, like, weirdly calculated. Like, I was mentioning you before we started recording, like, one of the articles that you put into our workflowy was something that, like, you struck a chord with me because I'd already sort of been thinking in this line, and it was something like imperfect vaccination can enhance virulent pathogens. And basically, It was just about a study they had done with chickens. And this is the summary of it. It says, there is a theoretical expectation that some types of vaccines could prompt the evolution of more virulent, hotter pathogens. This idea follows from the notion that natural selection removes pathogen strains that are so quote-unquote hot that they kill their hosts and therefore themselves. Vaccines that let the host survive but do not prevent the spread of the pathogen relax this selection, allowing the evolution of hotter pathogens to occur. This type of vaccine is often called a leaky vaccine. When vaccines prevent transmission, as is the case for nearly all vaccines used in humans, this type of evolution towards increased virulence is blocked, but when vaccines leak, allowing at least some pathogen transmission, they could create the ecological conditions that would allow hot strains to emerge and persist. This article is from 2015, by the way, so it seems very prescient. But This theory proved highly controversial when it was first proposed over a decade ago, but here we report experiments with Marek's disease virus and poultry that show that modern commercial leaky vaccines can have precisely this effect. They allow the onward transmission of strains otherwise too lethal to persist. Thus, the use of leaky vaccines can facilitate the evolution of pathogen strains that put unvaccinated hosts at greater risk of severe disease. The future challenge is to identify whether there are other types of vaccines used in animals and humans that might also generate these evolutionary risks. So, I'm not saying that the solution would have been just to have, like, no attempt at vaccination and just, like, let everyone die so that the virus would then be stamped out. Or, like, that there isn't, like, a reasonable hesitancy around the vaccines, especially, like, in certain communities. But that's, like, really, to me, what's sus about it. Because, like, vaccination, the way it breaks down, it is along, like, socioeconomic, like, racial, like, privilege lines. Like, it's interesting how, like, the people who are vaccinated, like, I do think at this point, like, again, I totally understand, like, where the hesitancy comes from. I myself am vaccinated and, like, haven't died or anything happening. And I think that I am kind of inclined to think the vaccine mostly does work to the point that it, like, makes, if you get the virus, like, you'll be, like, safer if you get it and you had the vaccine. But, like, as we know, it doesn't prevent transmission. And when you have a pretty sizable or, like, at least significant portion of the population that will not get vaccinated, which probably would have been the case anyway, but certainly is exacerbated by, like, this bizarre, like, media scape that we exist in. This dialectical thing where you have, like, maniacs like Michael Flynn on one side and then, like, Stephen Colbert's, like, vaccine dance on the other, like, that creates this perfect storm or, like, this perfect balance where, like, this could theoretically just keep perpetuating itself somehow, where you have the unvaccinated suffering under these increasingly awful diseases, and then people having to get more and more vaccines that, and the virus ultimately just can't go away just because we have the perfect balance of each.
It becomes endemic, and if you don't sign up to get the jab, then you are marked for potentially
like you're a
really
second-class citizen
and dying. And then with all the rhetoric around it of like, we're running out of beds because of these sick, fucking selfish, disgusting, like infected worm people that like aren't even people, and basically kind of a manufacturing of consent in the popular discourse, like definitely on the kind of liberal, like pro-science side of, can we just like start denying these people care already? Like, can we just do that?
Yeah.
You know, there's kind of this thing where then to what extent does it become a self-fulfilling prophecy that these people are going to have, you know, worse health outcomes and die more because they're being seen as these disease vectors that are socially irresponsible. Therefore, they should be at the back of the line if they go to the emergency room.
Like,
but like people kind of want that because they feel like these people are bad. And you look at a place like Australia right now, it looks absolutely insane what they're doing, and it's hard to wrap my head around like an American, you know, how people could be kind of gaslit into accepting a nonstop lockdown for almost 20 months and like having drones chasing you down the street if you're not wearing a mask outside.
Yeah, and it's also like another thing that's like I find to be pretty fucked up is the way that like, you know, I mean, I definitely don't love wearing a mask, so I appreciate that you don't have to wear a mask, like, you know, everywhere you go these days so much, or like some places have relaxed that. Well, one thing that I noticed, and maybe you noticed that there as well, is that like people in like serving roles or like workers like are more forced to wear it, and like you can actually see the visible class distinction.
Yeah, look at the Met Gala. Everybody from AOC and her Bronfman friend on down
wearing it, right?
Yeah, and the help was wearing the mask.
Well, yeah, they always have to. Like, you know, for instance, like in a Starbucks or something, you know, not that you should go to the Zionist entity, but like, like if you go to like
Starbucks a demon.
Yeah, anytime you go to a place like that, you like. We'll see that they have to all wear masks, but you don't necessarily have to if you're like going to a coffee shop, 7-Eleven, something like that, you know? Like anything.
And now they all have to get vaccines as well for the most part. If you work for a large corporation, even if you I know people who work from home completely that never go to an office, still being required to get a vaccination. Just cause. I mean, there's not even really like a really clear epidemiological kind of advantage, except in the sense that like you're going to broadly like force people, I won't even say nudge, like really shove people into getting it or else they'll lose their jobs. But in terms of like the risk to a company, sure, there are some kind of businesses where everyone's in close contact and poor ventilation and it'd be bad. But it's like, if you're working at home in front of your computer, like, are you really doing more of your part? Like, especially if you avoid kind of exposing it and spreading. It's just it's odd that they've taken such a hard direction after basically promising throughout the first half of the year that they would never do this. Like, they would never do this. Like Biden is on the record so many times of being like, no, vaccine mandates, no, that's not going to be a thing. And then they just like seem to have kind of panicked in the summer.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I think that, like, the thing is, there's, like, people are very intractable. And, like, I don't know. Personally, for myself, like, I'm kind of, like, I don't know. Like I said, I'm, like, not super, like, into the idea that the vaccine itself is dangerous. I feel like that's, like, a little bit of a psyop. But before you get upset at me for saying the vaccine isn't dangerous, what I think is dangerous is, like, it's very convenient how, like, people at this point have, like, a social consciousness, like, to an extent where, I mean, like, that's a great exaggeration what I just made, like, or what I'm in the process of making, which is to say that, like, you know, especially liberals in America are, like, kind of a little bit more vigilant about, like, nursing, like, extreme bigotries or dehumanizing people, but, like, we found, like, the perfect thing that like enables that, you know, like literally to think of people as like disease carrying like subhumans, like, you know, and there's no empathy because the way that it is done is that it aligns perfectly with this like very strident politicization. It's like a total pincer and a total trap where
if you don't want
like,
the vaccine, you're a Trump supporter.
It's outrageous that there should be like, you know, well, I mean, it's at least foolish that you would expect that they would. Like anyone who was paying any attention, like how it's gonna break down. And with the mandates, like that. I mean, that's the thing where I feel like, the Breitbart guy, like he might not be right about like the sort of like 4D chess conscious kind of like thing where we're trying to necessarily kill people, but I mean, I don't know, like but
at a certain point, there's a lot. I mean, we'll get into it later because there's a lot of factors that could kind of change how we have this conversation in terms of talking about what is this virus and where did it come from? Because then if you start to go down that rabbit hole and you find out that it maybe didn't come from a Wuhan wet market where like a bat bit a pangolin that bit a ferret badger and then sneezed on somebody, which has never been proven, then you do have to start to wonder about the particularities maybe of like who this virus kind of targets. I mean, it's like deeply circumstantial to point out, but it goes after sick and elderly people pretty much like overwhelmingly. Yes. And it doesn't seem to have a specific racial bias, only insofar as there were like racially mediated discrepancies and inequalities in our societies.
Well, in terms of who has access to the vaccine and who gets it.
And also therapeutics too, because I mean, it's like, I don't even know if we need to get into the I word and talk about horse paste,
Oh, ivermectin.
A fucking generic drug that a guy won the fucking Nobel Prize for discovering.
Nobel Prize winning for humans. Nobel Prize winning for humans. Well, I don't, I'm not saying that like it doesn't work at all or like whatever. Like I don't know, but my point only is that like in terms of access to the vaccine, and sure, whatever, ivermectin, if that,
or not even ivermectin, just other therapeutics in general. Like early prevention, like competent hospital care that is good and helpful and not, like sticking you on a ventilator after 5 seconds and then just like leaving you to rot, or I don't know, even remdesivir, which our boy Peter Daszak was absolutely boasting about last year as like the best therapeutic ever that was discovered as a result of his research, and actually I think has ties to, I want to say Gilead Health. A biotech company.
Wow.
I know,
Gilead?
right? Not a good name.
Me?
I think they're also the creators of PrEP, the HIV prophylactic drug. But I think Bill Gates is heavily invested in Gilead. Maybe I might get a Pinocchio for that, but I'm pretty sure it's true. And actually, I've seen stuff more recently. Remdesivir is one of those kind of generic drugs. Actually, I don't know if it's generic, but that has been widely given out to hospitals in the U.S. But I guess in previous studies before the COVID era when they were using it, it has a lot of like really bad side effects, and it's actually not a totally safe. It's probably a lot more dangerous than ivermectin, basically, from a few things I read about like maybe causing like renal failure, like attacking the kid, like really toxic for the kidneys and other shit like that. So it goes to show you that, without putting too fine of a point on anything, that there's a real breakdown in even the most basic like information about like what fucking works, what doesn't work, like how good is this vaccine. Like the goalposts have shifted so many times just in this last year about all of that shit, and there's so many conflicts of interest that are going unexamined by like the mainstream press, and then even to the extent that they get brought up on like Tucker or something, they immediately get shit coded and they get spun around and like, this is why China's behind it, which I'm not.
Tucker basically, it's a perfect example, libs will point this out, but I don't think they're necessarily wrong. Like Tucker and Dave Rubin, all those fools are absolutely vaccinated. I mean, they have to be to work at Fox, like they're vaccinated, but they do not encourage their listeners to get it. They tell them like not to be. And,
they stoke a lot of skepticism.
I find that to be a little bit sus. Like, I'm not like saying that. I mean, I fully understand why people like are suspicious, and I think we'll get more deeply into like all the sus connections going on here. But I find it sus when you have like Michael Flynn like ranting and raving about the sevenfold archangels and sevenfold points of light, and the IM network like telling people that like they're putting the vaccine in your salad dressing, it's going to make you lose your soul or something, and like how
was that? Yeah,
how convenient that now we have like these people who are just dug in, and we have to do a vaccine mandate. We have to make people show their papers, like it just works out perfectly. Like it's just ideal.
It really is a sinister
and like
dialectic.
then you have like a subhuman population that like they're ruining everything. Everything is justified to stop them, and like they can and they won't, like the more you push, like the more they'll be dug in because of the way that everything is worked out. I find that to be sus.
It is sus. It is sus. And I think even if it's not in Congress, because I think we tend to lump things like kind of together. Like I think this is a tendency of like, say, if you're exploring the origins of COVID and maybe you're hypothesizing that it was created in a lab, that it wasn't zoonotic in origin, or it was edited. It was a zoonotic virus that was edited in a lab and then got out somehow. Even if you believe that it was like deliberately let out of a lab somehow, then it kind of like follows that you're very skeptical about the effectiveness of the vaccine. And I can definitely like see that line of thinking, and I don't necessarily disagree with it, but I think it's interesting to also look at the possibility that if this thing was created, then the cure for it that they're rolling out to millions of people could be reasonably effective and like not. It's not going to kill everybody. It's not, even if this was a pandemic. The vaccine, it doesn't necessarily follow that the vaccine itself is like a trap to kill everybody or something like that.
No, that doesn't actually make any sense, really.
But it does kind of follow a logic that if you want to get people into this system of like, you're going to get regular shots in the future, you're going to carry around like a health passport on your phone or proof of vaccination to get to participate in social and economic life in this country, and really in most of the countries in the world, then you're going to get this thing that prevents you from getting killed by this virus. Now, of course, I think there are side effects, and I think it's like, I don't know, in the long run, I feel like it doesn't help like pro-vaccine advocates to like completely sweep it under the rug. I think that things like myocarditis and blood clots, I've known young, healthy people that got blood clots from the J&J vaccine personally. And, the doctor wouldn't say, like, literally that it was caused by the vaccine, but it happened like a week and a half after, and you don't usually get blood clots when you're, like, 32. But anyways, nonetheless, like, I think it does seem to be, now that we're basically the main experimental trial population, the people that, like, got it so far, and while I think there probably are elevated VAERS reports and like there's a lot of stuff that was like not fully vetted by nature of like this all being done in 1 year, et cetera, there's totally fair criticisms to make. But I think also like most people, almost everybody in my life that I know that's gotten the vaccine has not had like they haven't dropped dead or anything like that, and like nobody's gotten COVID and like ended up in the hospital, though I have heard a few anecdotal like friend of a friend of a friend kind of stories about like middle-aged people that were vaccinated like going into the hospital with bad COVID with like a breakthrough case. But still, I think it seems like relatively rare, and it does protect you. So then it does beg the question of then, especially if the leaky vaccine thing, if there perhaps is any validity to it, because this sounds like the mRNA vaccines sound like the perfect type of leaky vaccine to cause what this 2015 paper was talking about. Like, I'm not a virologist, but it just sounds, I've heard a few scientists since COVID make this argument that like the type of vaccines they're deploying that really don't prevent transmission at all kind of do create like a dangerous like potential breeding ground to optimize this virus, because it's bumping up against like a vaccinated person's immune system, but it's not completely being blocked out of their body, and it can still kind of like duplicate and then spread to somebody else. So it creates almost like a challenge ground, like a proving ground for it to amp itself up and become more pathogenic and like more virulent and all this other stuff. So then it makes it more like the vaccinated population is incubating, like say maybe the Delta variant, though I think maybe the Delta came around too early for that to really be a thing, and it came out of India. But in the future, like going into the next, flu season this year and all that stuff, with a huge vaccinated population, it sounds hypothetically possible that vaccinated people could basically be an incubator for a more virulent strain of COVID, which is then probably probably not going to kill all the vaccinated people. But if that unvaccinated people catch it, who knows? Like maybe you get a kind of...
And if you think about it from the point of view of like, if you're saying like, oh, it's a pandemic, the people who would be planning the demic, like the people that they would want to die, like this is where like, you know, Alex Jones will be like, I feel so bad for these, you know, these brainwashed communists. Like they obey Bill Gates and then they're all going to die, folks. You know, like that doesn't make any sense. Like why would Bill Gates want his slaves, his obedient slaves to die? Like, no, he wants the patriots to die. Like, and that is who I think will be the ones who die. But like, you know, it's not just like the MAGA people in the United States, it's the Palestinians, you know, like it's people like that
it's,
who
Africa,
aren't vaccinated. Yeah,
which
exactly.
has such a low vaccination rate. It's like poor countries in South America. It's the global South. It's like the poor, and then in America, it's like the deplorables who by choice, but also a lot of like, we shouldn't over-essentialize the vaccine hesitant population to be a bunch of white like MAGA people, because there's a lot of just like working class people, a lot of like African Americans who for very good reason,
Redditors or like fools who are like, you know, going in for Michael Flynn or whatever. Like some people just simply don't have access or don't have like the information or just like don't prioritize it for some reason. It's not all like the ideological stuff, but that I feel like, you know, just puts you like over the top a little bit. That's just like the icing on the cake to make it like really, you know,
but I want to emphasize even, and maybe you don't want to call it ideological, but like there even are people that are not MAGA that like do not want to get they could get the vaccine anytime if they want to, but they just don't. They just don't want to get it.
Because as you said, we are like it's just a fact that like we're a trial population and people like have a visceral aversion to that, which makes perfect sense, especially from like communities that have been subjected to that with like very sinister results, such as the Black community, you know, in the United States. Like that's quite understandable. Like so,
very understandable.
You know,
and anybody like the idea that you would prevent people from opting out of basically being what is essential, and sure, it might be worth it. It might still be for the greater good, but basically it's like a mass trial operation of rolling out this like new type of vaccine. The idea that you would ban people effectively from opting out of that, if for whatever reason, especially if you take into account the people that got COVID in the past year and a half and don't have the vaccine, they still have immunity, but for some reason the United States does not count those people at all. Now there are countries in Europe that count it. There are countries, you know, in Asia and stuff that if you show that you've had a positive COVID test in the last like year, you're considered immune, which makes like immunological sense. Like that's actual science. But, you know, when you go on TV, you see all these like spooky ass doctors who are just like, oh, well, you know, the studies are incomplete and we actually don't know like how good your immunity is if, you know, I don't know how good your antibodies are. And you really should just like, fuck that. Doesn't count. Go get vaccinated.
Too. But yeah.
Well, yeah, it's true of the vaccine as well. So we don't know. But if you take that chunk of people, that's actually a significant chunk of people that have had it that aren't vaccinated. That probably cuts, like, if you take the chunk of, 40% of the population is kind of not vaccinated in the United States right now, it might be as many as half of those people have had COVID. So you really are talking about, like, maybe at most, like, 25%, probably more like 20% of people who have never gotten COVID and are not vaccinated, which is like a pretty small slice of the population overall. And I remember there used to be all this talk about herd immunity earlier in the year. Well, we got to get the herd immunity, Fauci would always say. And the numbers they were always throwing out were like, I think when we get to like 80%, we'll probably be good. Well, now it's like if you do throw in like the people that have already had it, we probably are at about 80%, but they're acting like, oh, like, no, we have to get like 99% of people vaccinated now, which just doesn't feel like that makes sense. Like, I don't know. It just feels like, but it feels like the point is more to sign up, to get people to buy in to this new paradigm. And I think you see it with the boosters now, that this is going to be like a flu shot thing for maybe, I don't know, a decade, maybe the rest of our lives, where they're going to be pressuring people, encouraging people, just like they started doing with flu shots 10 years ago, to just get like whatever the updated software of the mRNA vaccine is, like twice a year or whatever. And I mean, there's so many
I mean, just the
sinister
fact
motivations
of, like,
to doing
vaccine
that.
mandate is like a huge, like, has there ever been anything like that in American history? I don't think so. Like, it seems very odd.
There were localized mandates, I think, in various outbreaks in like the early 20th century when like all the prominent scientists in the country were eugenicists. But no, I think that there were things like, I think there were vaccine mandates in like working towns and stuff, and like, you know, I don't know, Lowell, Massachusetts, or like in San Francisco, maybe during the flu. I don't know. They didn't have a flu vaccine though. Never mind. I think for like smallpox and a couple other things like that, there were like localizers, but there's never been like a federal nationwide, like it would be like if you lived in a city or worked at a factory,
like surveillance, like panopticon era, like it just like is odd and like almost feels like, yeah, it feels very like a very strange precedent that had a mandate. But again, like I can understand why people are led along into feeling that it's necessary, because yeah, I mean that would be, I don't think that it will, honestly. Like, or, you know, I'm very skeptical that it will based on the way, like, all the promised solutions so far have panned out. But, and because, you know, people, the more you push, the more that, like, many will resist. But, you know, I think that it definitely seems to have, like, a weird precedent. And I don't think that it will solve the problem. But I'm not sure, like, you know, I can definitely understand how it's presented as the only possible solution. Because, yeah, you know, without it, like, it will just go on. I think it will go on with it too, but either way, I don't think that
well, I think that's
work.
the thing now that people are saying we have to prepare for. I turned on CNN this morning just to see what the old propaganda box was saying, what the old World Alert was saying, and now they're kind of back towards, and this is maybe even part of like the manipulation. This is part of like the program, is the bouncing back and forth between optimism and despair. Like every other, like if you are plugged into like MSNBC or CNN in particular, or like NPR, like you were just you're being bounced back and forth between absolute panic and then like this optimism, like, hey, people are getting vaccinated, it's over. So now after a couple months of absolutely freaking out after we had supposedly like conquered the virus, like mission accomplished on July 4th, now the things are going down again. So now everyone's like, oh, it looks like maybe the pandemic is finally behind us. Which, you know, to say that like right on the eve of like the winter flu season feels like in 2 months we're going to be back in some kind of like,
I mean,
running
I just
around with
got
our hair
like
on fire
sick
mode.
for the first time since the pandemic. I was sick during our Borman episode.
Yes, I remember that. You were sick for like a week and a half, right?
I'm bouncing back, not for a week and a half.
I thought you were sniffly on the previous
half a week. Oh yeah, I was. I think that was allergies though. Yeah, I was sniffly for Lisa's interview, but that was just allergies because we had gone out and it was like a you know, an allergy heavy day. But then I actually did get a cold. I thought that was allergies when we were recording, but it turned out to be a cold that I had for several days. So
and it wasn't
yeah, it's
COVID.
that time of year.
Did you test it?
As far as I know, it wasn't COVID, but I wasn't tested. I don't plan on getting tested because, like, you know, I've done my part. You know, I'm doing my part.
Well, look at it this way: if you did, you got your booster, so you know, it's all good.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I mean, it is. I do feel like we're not going to exit this paradigm because the reason for it, like it's just like 9/11. Putting aside, you know, who did it, it was so damn useful for the people in power, the people in the driver's seat, that they can't throw this ring into the fires of Mount Doom. They can't let it go. Like they are going to keep they're going to keep chugging, and even the people that, like we'll probably talk about, start really getting into in the second hour, are who, you know, you could make a decent circumstantial argument that they might have caused this pandemic. Literally, those people are all failing upwards and are getting more money and more media attention. Dr. Fauci is like a god now on to like half the country.
And
it's amazing that people
it's
aren't more
just,
sick
like,
of him.
In general, it's just occasions like a huge upward transfer of wealth, as everyone knows, and it is an incontestable fact.
Yep, absolutely. All this emergency, just like after 9/11, when, you know, the stock market computers were knocked out, and, you know, the Fed loves a crisis where it can just make the money printer go burr, you know, and they definitely did that.
I think that it is like, I think that the parallel that kind of occurred to us in our 9/11 episode is still pretty trenchant. Our recent 9/11 episode is still pretty trenchant because like it is kind of like it does sort of the aspect of the unvaccinated and everything, like, and the people who are to blame, who generally that's transposed into like, the sort of opposing political side of the sort of issue of vaccination or the pandemic in general, that like really does resemble the like, the figure of like the hook-nosed evil, Charlie Hebdo Muslim, who's like just a terrorist and he's got a scimitar, and like,
or the secret communist that we talked about in our Paul Robeson episode, like it's spraying his infected speech and ideas to crowds of people and infecting them.
Anything is justified, preemptively attacking like him if he's talking, like preemptive violence against him like is justified. The same thing, like, them saying, like, them believing this, that they deserve to be nuked or something, like, that, like, it's amazing that has been something that people are able to kind of, like, replicate and fall into again, like, there's just more and more new ways to, like, fall into this bizarre trap that makes so much justifiable, and, like,
and whatever happens these days, I think this will come up.
It isn't an exact matchup, but I would encourage people who like, have like the sort of sensibilities, like the sort of liberal sensibilities, and who would think like that they would never like, or who would like, be appalled at the idea of like the bigotry towards Muslims that happened after 9/11, like to consider that, because of course it's not a perfect analog. Like, there's other, but I think that in many ways, like it is, and it's very interesting to think about how people who are kind of have like their defenses up against that kind of thinking, like are able to fall into it under certain circumstances. There are certain like little things that make those kind of patterns emerge. And like, I'm not saying that one has to fully like change one's mind, or that even that the people after 9/11 who didn't like Muslims like had to decide to like Muslims, like, or love Muslims or convert to Islam. I mean, I am saying that, but I'm not saying that. I'm saying there's certain patterns, there's certain like ways of thinking where like certain horizons are crossed that are bad, and then I think when we're clear-headed and we're in the aftermath, then we can see how they were bad, but in the heat of it, we usually can't. We can't. And I think, again, that's why Trump, the presence of Trump, and even the specter of him today is like so useful to stoke that type of thinking. I remember, I think maybe I said it recently on some episode, but I was reflecting on how, like in Los Angeles throughout most of 2020, maybe just because it wasn't hit like that hard, but like, I live in a pretty lib part of a pretty lib city, and I felt like I never really saw people like walking around by themselves wearing masks outside. And then there was like a convergence in December and January where the cases actually were spiking in Los Angeles, and everything was shut down again, and it was very grim. But I noticed like this big jump after January 6th and after like the inauguration of Biden. So like at the end of January, like everybody was masked up. Like they were driving around in their cars by themselves, the windows up, wearing a mask. And everyone just like really tense and like terrified. And I just like, I don't know, intuitively, I felt like there was a weird convergence of the threat of like the MAGA hordes like storming the Capitol and like people spreading the virus, like running rampant, spreading the virus, particularly evil MAGA people spreading the virus. And I feel like that really stuck for like a big chunk of the year. And now, and then it kind of like mutated again after the vaccination drive happened. But then like the cases started going up, where anybody that wasn't vaccinated, it's immediately assumed to be like a specific political statement. Like it's supposed to be representative of like a certain worldview of irrationality and believing in conspiracy theories, which it's really interesting when we get into like Peter Daszak and stuff, and other people around him and Fauci, and just the overall, like if you turn on every day on CNN, like they're railing against specifically conspiracy theories, dangerous, baseless conspiracy theories. And that has been a theme really like from the very beginning of the pandemic.
that was just a litany of like, don't believe these conspiracy theories. Trump is pushing conspiracy theories. Like, conspiracy theories were so heavily identified with Trump and his supporters that there was no room on the left to basically talk about something that wasn't confirmed by like NPR and CNN and everybody else and all the experts and Fauci and all these people.
And like as I think we're going to start to see like as we move into the subject, that consensus like was kind of it was manufactured, you know, like it wasn't like a natural like conclusion. Like people made like a calculated decision to like, you know, circle the wagons around the idea that it was zoonotic, you know, that it was naturally occurring. When really like that actually like the lab leak at the very least, like the accidental lab leak cannot be ruled out. But the only reason why like, and I think that even I want to even say like Biden's White House like has kind of like acknowledged or like said like we got to kind of look into this or something. But you know,
they did look into it and they came back like inconclusive.
Yeah,
I think this summer.
Like, it's not really, it can't really be ruled out because there are big missing pieces. The main missing piece is like people can't actually find like what the direct ancestor of COVID is, and there are just like very unusual features that it has as a virus. Again, like as you said, you're not a virologist, I'm not a virologist, so you know we've definitely both made like you know statements about like various scientific disciplines, and people have later come to me and been like, actually like that's wildly wrong. So hopefully you know if you're a virologist or an epidemiologist listening to this, like you know you'll be tolerant. But
we are
as the
Trillbillies were recently accused of doing. We're playing fast and loose with virology. And but it turns out maybe we weren't like, you know, it's one thing to metaphorically, rhetorically play fast and loose with it. It's another thing to actually go to a lab and play fast and loose with virology. They played fast and loose.
They definitely played fast and loose. I'm like really like, you know, like, I mean, as I've said, like, I'm definitely not like super down like the rabbit hole of like, you know, the Alex Jones type of thing, like Fauci put like this in the vaccine, like it's gonna take your soul, folks. Like, but you know, I definitely am like very sussed out by the stuff around the WIV, like the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and like the NIH grants and all that stuff. Like,
it's kind of mind blowing. It blew my mind the last few weeks reading about it, and
just that like Vanity Fair article like was really, you know, and I read like a lot of the, you know, I'm trying to do my due diligence, like I read the pushback and stuff, but what I found like in a lot of the pushback articles, like they were all like, well, you know, we can't really rule this out, and COVID does have these weird features. Like mostly what they established was like, you know, the zoonotic explanation is still possible. Which but the alternative
but it's
is
like
possible.
But it gets referred to, and everyone acts upon the assumption that the zoonotic theory is like validated and probably the correct one, and they act with great hostility towards anybody.
I feel like that's what we need to get into first, is like how did that consensus like come about? Because like the sort of the WHO like report of like that's extremely unlikely, that conclusion, like that's so like kind of like fabricated and like deliberately
honestly it's like a magic virus theory. It's like, well, the virus like went like this and like bounced off a pangolin and then like, you know, went through the wet market and then it ricocheted
which, like,
off a
never
parrot and
doesn't
then
actually like sell bat meat or anything at all.
Like you know, the best thing Peter Daszak could say, and we'll get into this, but of course, you know, he was on the WHO investigative team that was selected to go to Wuhan and figure it out, and like his big bombshell was that, you know, that convinced him was that they found a few frozen mammals in like a freezer in Wuhan that I think were ferret badgers, and which
What's
are
a ferret badger?
A ferret badger is like a kind of ferret that I guess like all ferrets.
Similar to a badger?
Well, I don't know if it's more of a badger or more of a ferret. I'm not really sure.
Ferret hyphen badger. It is an animal.
And it I think, you know, we'll get into the people who've done experiments with ferrets.
I feel bad they got COVID.
Well, no, they didn't have COVID. That's the thing. They didn't have COVID. No, he found a bunch of carcasses and like 4 of them, and he tested them for COVID, and they all tested negative. But he's like, but you know, we only tested a few, and there could have been more. There could have been one that did. And it's like, okay, so you found like also like you went there like a year later, like somebody could have just thrown a ferret like in a freezer. Like who's to say that they literally
Also,
like lock
until
it down
they
like a
actually
crime
find
scene?
the virus, like that is the ancestor of COVID, or like the progenitor of COVID, like then they haven't found anything. You just found like the idea that there's like a ferret and like that people could have gotten it from a ferret. Like, yeah, sure.
Yeah,
Like that's
all they have
theory.
is a hypothesis.
Like, yeah, you don't need to show me a ferret in a freezer so that could have happened. Like, you know, a ferret could have bitten someone. Like, I don't know.
Well, I think
like,
the problem was that it's come out subsequently, and this was, you know, very misreported early on, that that market did not sell bats or pangolins or a lot of the other animals that they thought like were similar enough to humans that they could have carried it. So it's like he finally found like they didn't really even sell mammals like openly. It was maybe like an under the table kind of thing, and so he was able to find the frozen carcasses of like a few little ferret mammals and was like, aha, like, see. But it's like, not really. Like, you know, like that's you still have a lot of leaps to go through to actually get to basically, you know, what. And he also equally says that, well, it's totally possible it jumped to humans before in some other part of China, and then like somebody went to the Wuhan wet market and just started spreading it there, which is actually the same kind of argument that people make about if it came from the lab, which one of the
it's like
Wuhan
ridiculous
labs
that like all the attention
right down the
is on
street.
this like wet market and not on the virology lab that works on bat coronaviruses.
I know,
like, you know, like
what
okay,
the fuck? Yeah, you know, exactly. Like one of the facilities is like,
all right, there's a wet market, like I get it, but like there's also like a fucking virology lab that studies like this exact shit. Like, you know,
like one place doesn't have bats, the other one has bats that specifically have all of the coronaviruses that you've dug out of caves for the last 10 years in like a secure facility that people at the State Department were worried like didn't have adequate safety procedures, according to documents leaked to the Washington Post. And so it's like really you kind of do have to step back and just think about this like openly and like logically, like where is it more likely to have come out of? And of course, like there's probably a whole story if it did come out of the Wuhan lab, and of course that's politically explosive, and of course like that could be twisted into like this like very dangerous kind of situation where it's like, oh, China did it. But as we'll get into, the thing that even a lot of the people exposing the Wuhan lab, I think now is just starting to scratch the surface. But even a lot of these like right-wing people, because of course it's about the China virus, right? Like the CCP virus, as Bannon would say. And they believe this is like a deliberate bioweapon to take down Trump and blah, blah, blah. But, you know, they neglect to mention that one of the main funders of the bat coronavirus research in the Wuhan lab was this U.S. nonprofit called EcoHealth Alliance, which, as we will get into, received tens of millions of dollars from the Pentagon, specifically DARPA, and USAID, which is one of the most common kind of civil front organizations for CIA activities.
In addition
abroad.
to just the NIH, which is, you know,
and
like
the NIH.
intercept documents. Didn't. I mean, this is like not like really damning at all, but not a super great coincidence that like the amount of money they got from the NIH for their first year of research was like $666,000.
Wait,
like,
really?
Yeah.
No, I didn't,
you didn't
see
that. Yeah.
Oh my
A little
god.
bit sus. Yeah, like not a good look.
These people are sick. Folks. But
I don't want to be negative, but vouch
well,
for
yeah.
family.
Yeah. No, I mean, it was a lot of money. I think it was $40-something million from the Pentagon and something like $60 or $70 million from USAID, which comprised more than half of their funding, which is not publicly advertised, but if you look into their like financial disclosure documents, you could find the receipts from this grant money. And so basically, like EcoHealth in a nutshell was a private entity where Peter Daszak was the president, and they would get paid by the government and then distribute grants and funding to scientists in labs. And so, like, they were basically the conduit of funding a good chunk of this research in Wuhan.
Yes, and then, as you said, like, Peter Daszak gets invited to, like, go and weigh in on that very influential sort of analysis of the possible origins of the virus, I think it was with the WHO.
WHO, which is sus in its own way.
This is
very big Alan Dulles on the Warren Commission energy. Let's get this guy to investigate. The guy who would have one of the prime suspects being involved in this. Let's put him on the investigative panel.
Yeah, I mean, this is from that Vanity Fair article, which I mentioned, which is pretty good. It's like the fight to uncover COVID's origins. I think it's just called the lab leak theory, and that's the subtitles inside the fight to uncover COVID-19's origins. And a lot is made of the complicity of China, which isn't nil in this, but the Peter Daszak stuff comes through clearly in this section. It says, in early July, the World Health Organization invited the U.S. government to recommend experts for a fact-finding mission to Wuhan, a sign of progress in the long-delayed probe of COVID-19's origins. Questions about the WHO's independence from China, the country's secrecy, and the raging pandemic had turned the anticipated mission into a minefield of international grudges and suspicion. Within weeks, the U.S. government submitted 3 names to the WHO. An FDA veterinarian, a CDC epidemiologist, and an NIAID virologist. None were chosen. Instead, only one representative from the U.S. made the cut, Peter Daszak.
Wow.
It had been evident from the start that China would control who would come and what they could see. In July, when the WHO sent member countries a draft of the terms governing the mission, the PDF document was titled CHN and WHO Agreed Final Version, suggesting that China had pre-approved its contents. Part of the fault lay with the Trump administration, which had failed to counter China's control over the scope of the mission when it was being hammered out 2 months earlier. Did they fail or did they not care? The resolution forwarded to the World Health Assembly called not for a full inquiry into the origins of the pandemic, but instead for a mission to identify the zoonotic source of the virus. The natural origin hypothesis was baked into the enterprise.
Yep.
It was a huge difference that only the Chinese understood, said Jamie Metzel. While the administration was huffing and puffing, some really important things were happening around the WHO, and the U.S. didn't have a voice. So there we go. They were huffing and puffing, they didn't want that, but anyway, that's not really what, I don't think that's necessarily true, but anyway, so on January 14th, 2021, Daszak and 12 other international experts arrived in Wuhan to join 17 Chinese experts and an entourage of government minders. They spent 2 weeks of the month-long mission quarantined in their hotel rooms. The remaining 2-week inquiry was more propaganda than probe, complete with a visit to an exhibit extolling President Xi's leadership. The team saw almost no raw data, only the Chinese government analysis of it. We're about to get to the absolute worst part. They paid one visit to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, where they met with Shi Zhongli, as recounted in an annex to the mission report. One obvious demand would have been access to the WIV's database of some 22,000 virus samples and sequences, which had been taken offline. At an event convened by a London organization on March 10th, Daszak was asked whether the group had made such a request. He said there was no need. Shi Zhongli had stated the WVI took the database down due to hacking attempts during the pandemic. Absolutely reasonable, Daszak said. And we did not ask to see the data. As you know, a lot of this work has been conducted with EcoHealth Alliance. We do basically know what's in those databases. There's no evidence of viruses closer to SARS-CoV-2 than rat G13 in those databases. Simple as that. In fact, the database had been taken offline on September 12, 2019, 3 months before the official start of the pandemic. A detail uncovered by Gilles Demanneuf and 2 of his drastic colleagues.
It was taken down as a result of an alleged hacking attempt in September 2019.
Well, they said that it was, Shi Zhongli, the bat lady, the hero, said that it was during the pandemic, the Anti-Science Alliance hacked her, but really they were taken down before the pandemic. So he was lying.
Yeah, he was lying.
Or
she was
lying. Yeah, we don't know. Yeah, she was lying, and it seems like he lied too. And he didn't even ask to see the data because he was like, it's all was done with EcoHealth Alliance, so I already know what's in the databases, and trust me, there's nothing in there.
Trust him. Why don't you trust him? Yeah, actually, Shi Zhongli was funded. A lot of her bat coronavirus research was directly funded by EcoHealth Alliance, and she has a long-standing relationship with Peter Daszak and also Dr. Ralph Barrick and these other characters.
She's a very interesting figure. I read a New York Times article about her actually, and it's weird because she's a big hero in China. She's even the hero of the pandemic. She's really held up as this very great patriotic figure, and a brilliant scientist, which I'm sure she is in many ways. But for one, it seems like she knows a lot more about like where this virus came from than she lets on, and also like she's sort of a weird international figure as well. Like she has gotten a lot of funding from U.S. agencies, and also like she's weirdly like not a member of the Communist Party, which is like very unusual for like someone in her position, like basically a celebrity and like a patriotic hero in China. So like weird. That kind of allows her like a little bit more like, you know, international status, you know, as she herself, Xi Zhongli, as a president, she says, you know, science has no borders, but it does have a motherland, you know. Anyway, so yeah, of course they eventually like after 2 weeks of fact-finding, the international experts concluded their mission by voting with a show of hands on which origin scenario seemed the most probable, with the Chinese experts there. Direct transmission from bat to human, possible to likely. Transmission through an intermediate animal, likely to very likely. Transmission through frozen food, possible. Transmission through a laboratory incident, extremely unlikely. And then media outlets around the world just reported that as like the conclusion, you know.
Amazing. We love science. We fucking love science. It's so great. It can never be political or politicized. It's just pure as the driven snow.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, science.
Inside the Story with Scott Pelley.
I was thinking about stories that we might do for 60 Minutes around the pandemic, of course, and one of the stories that had interested me for years was, where did these viruses come from? So I asked one of my producers, Ashley Veely, I said, let's do a story about the origin of the virus. Go find some people who know about this.
What do we know about the current coronavirus?
Not a lot, to be honest. I mean, we know it's very similar to SARS, but it is different.
So she comes back with an interview for me with a man named Peter Daszak. And I thought, oh, that name seems familiar. Of course, it was the same Peter Daszak I had done the story with for 60 Minutes 17 years ago. Well, back in 2003, we were with Peter Daszak and his virus hunters. We sailed in a small boat from Malaysia to a tiny island off the coast. There was an outbreak of a new virus that at the time was called Nipah virus. And Peter Daszak and the rest of his team had gone to Malaysia to try to figure out why people were suddenly being infected. And it turned into a fascinating detective story. They realized that the people who were infected were all pig farmers. And they discovered that the pigs had the virus. But then the question became, how did the pigs get it?
So now, we've talked a lot about the meta stuff, but let's get into the real meat here of the information that some of it came out earlier, but really we've gotten some whistleblower documents in the last month about the origin of COVID-19 and particularly the potential role that this group that we mentioned before, EcoHealth Alliance, may have played in it. Now, of course, there's no smoking gun per se, but the documents that were released were very, very interesting. So they came out via this group called Drastic Research, and their information, I guess, it seems it was verified by Newsweek, which ran a few articles about it. I don't know why Newsweek. I think The Intercept maybe also ran something about it.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure exactly. Like, I tried to look a little bit into Drastic Research and, like, kind of like, who are these people? Like, are they, like, connected to the Epoch Times? You know?
Yeah.
like, just try to make sure that, you know, there isn't, like, a shit coat lying in the wings for what. But as far as I can see, this is, like, a kind of a collective of scientists that have been, you know,
it's like some dude at Rutgers and Gilles de Manouf. I don't really know too much about him.
Yes, there are like a few people, that some of whom use their real names and some of whom have kind of online pseudonyms. I mean, I looked through and their documents do seem to be authentic, and the two big bombshell ones that, again, have not been getting enough coverage, but they really, I think, shed some light on what might have been going on. at the Wuhan Institute of Virology in the 2010s. So one is a proposal to DARPA, a project proposal, which was called Project DEFUSE, diffusing the threat of bat-borne coronaviruses. This was submitted to DARPA. This is a grant request submitted to DARPA in, I think, March of 2018 that was going to be basically pursued at a few different labs around the world. One was at the Palo Alto Research Center in Palo Alto, California, which I think has a long and storied history of all kinds of interesting things in the kind of internet, like even, I think, parapsychology world. Anyways, and then Wuhan, China, at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and at Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where Dr. Ralph Barrick works, and I guess also in Singapore, New York, and Madison, Wisconsin. This document basically... It also, okay, it's worth mentioning that the second document that was leaked by the whistleblower through Drastic was the rejection letter by DARPA rejecting this proposal, which is interesting in its own right. It rejects it, but says, although if funding became available, certain components of particular interest could have gone ahead, subject to a clear contractual dual-use research of concern risk mitigation plan that, quote, includes a responsible communications plan.
Even the NIH funding document for their bat research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, they were like, if this crosses over into gain-of-function research, you need to let us know right away. And we need to reassess the project, which is a inherently slippery term. A lot of the stuff that I read from people I think even Daszak himself, basically what they a lot of people who are interested in this type of somewhat dangerous, arguably bat coronavirus research, they're you can't get rid of gain of function research, without getting rid of all of virology. I don't remember exactly who said that, but that's kind of the sentiment, that everyone kind of was just wink, wink, nudge about the whole thing,
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe to start out here, to read Drastic Research's kind of context and summary of the EcoHealth proposal, just to place it in a little bit of context, because there were a lot of things going on in virology and gain-of-function research and all these things in the 2010s.
Yeah. And gain-of-function is just so difficult to define that it can be defined really broadly or really narrowly. It's basically making a virus have new features that could be dangerous to humans, or that could make a virus that can't affect humans become transmissible to humans, so you can study it. That's one way to define it. Some people define
or other
it as
animals, or rats or ferrets.
Yeah, sometimes people define it as just giving it any new features at all, but it's a very slippery term. It seems like people use very different definitions of it.
Yes, and it inherently also involves this term that we will come back to a few times, which is dual use, which I think in a nutshell basically is the notion that something that is made for a benign purpose, for research purposes, to say test human defenses against a potential virus, could also be used as a bioweapon just by nature of what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're inventing something that basically can infect humans more, well, then it logically follows that you could use it to infect humans, basically. So, or that it could be weaponized in some, whether it's by terrorists or scientists or the globalists, whatever. It's just this is something they talk about a lot, and it's very wrapped up with gain of function research. But I'll just read this context and summary that Drastic provided, because it'll help lay down the timeline of what was going on with EcoHealth. So they write, these leaked documents describing bat research proposed by EcoHealth Alliance should be considered in light of the following context. On August 27, 2021, the U.S. intelligence community issued a 502-word summary of the conclusions drawn up by the joint investigation ordered by President Biden in late May. Conspicuously absent from the brief statement were any indications that the evidence presented in testimony to Congress had been part of the intelligence community analysis, at least not in the unclassified version that was released. The lifting of the gain-of-function moratorium in late 2017 via the Potential Pandemic Pathogen Care and Oversight Framework, P3CO, has allowed gain-of-function research with SARS-like coronaviruses to resume with very few practical limits. In particular, the absence of clear definitions of gain-of-function, creative interpretations of the guidelines, and rather discretionary decisions to refer research projects or not, all contributed to reducing the effectiveness of the P3CO framework, despite the fact that other agencies of the U.S. federal government actively maintain the GOF standards. Daszak recently became aware of documents which show that EcoHealth Alliance, in concert with the WIV, were looking towards implementing an advanced human pathogenicity bat COVID research project that clearly qualifies as gain-of-function in a grant proposal submitted to a funding proposal call by the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, in the spring of 2018. The EcoHealth WIV proposal, named DEFUSE, was ultimately rejected for full funding, but leaving open the door for partial funding, in part because it skirted the GOF guidelines. In other words, a branch of the federal government had already judged aspects of EHA's research and the corresponding shared research plan with the WIV as falling under the definition of gain of function, only for HHS to approve similar work without P3CO review in 2018 and 2019. In particular, the P3CO framework was designed to allow greater flexibility for vaccine development, and in June of 2018, the NIH's Vaccine Research Center expanded its existing partnership with Moderna to include full-scale research into a pan-coronavirus vaccine platform. Sound familiar? EcoHealth Alliance repeatedly took advantage of this flexibility to continue their work with the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Daszak has reviewed the contents of these documents. They detail past achievements and planned experiments in collaboration with researchers from the WIV, East China Normal University, UNC Chapel Hill, Duke National University in Singapore, the USGS National Wildlife Health Center, and the Palo Alto Research Center, PARC. The grant proposal includes some elements of research that are already public via scientific papers, as well as other elements that have never been made public. These include, and this is the big whopper in this proposal, these include vaccinating wild bats using aerosolized recombinant SARS-CoV spike proteins in nanoparticles or in orthopoxviral vectors, and further work on published and unpublished COVID strains that could fill the extant gaps in our understanding of the origins of SARS-CoV-2. These grant proposal documents also show a staggeringly deep level of involvement of EcoHealth Alliance with the Wuhan lab on matters of national interest. For instance, by proposing that the DARPA grant pays a good chunk of key Wuhan researchers' salaries, or that some of these Wuhan researchers should be invited to DARPA headquarters in Arlington, all the while without proper risk assessment and considerations for ethical and social issues, and with an incorrect evaluation of what constitutes gain-of-function research. So yeah, that's basically the gist of like their report. They wanted to study bat coronaviruses, but particularly in this, what they say is that, and this is like, so this is actually a whole new theory about where COVID could have come from, because their proposal, I'll read it here on their one page from the report. There was a summary under the category approach. They wanted under intervention development. So there are 4 things they wanted to study. One was broad-scale immune boosting, inoculate bats with immune modulators to upregulate their naturally inhibited innate immunity and suppress viral replication, transiently reducing viral shedding and spillover risk. 2, targeted immune boosting. In concert with above, inoculate bats with novel chimeric polyvalent recombinant spike proteins to enhance their adaptive immune memory against specific high-risk viruses. So that sounds like literally testing mRNA vaccine technology on these bats. 3rd, viral dynamics. Developed stochastic simulation models to estimate the frequency, efficacy, and population coverage required for intervention approaches to effectively suppress the viral population. So how many bats do we need to vaccinate to reach herd immunity? And last but certainly not least, field trial. Use team expertise in wildlife vaccine delivery, transdermal nanoparticles, raccoon pox virus vector, to develop effective molecule delivery via automated aerosolization onto bats at roost entrance at our 3 test cave sites in a cave complex in Yunnan, China, where SARS-CoVs have infected people. Okay, so I guess in layman's terms, what they were proposing to DARPA was they had 3 test caves in China, not a lab, just caves.
In Yunnan, which is
in
kind
Yunnan.
of far away from Wuhan.
It is far away, but that is where they were taking a lot of these bat coronavirus samples. And I think Rat G13.
I think she had found like a cave of like weird like bat stuff, like or bat coronavirus in a cave in Yunnan at one point. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I think she found a lot of bat coronaviruses in those caves, and that's where the most close known relative of COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 is, I believe it's called Rat G13, and that was a rare bat coronavirus that a couple of miners contracted, I think, in 2012, and they became very sick after shoveling bat guano in a tunnel for 3 days with poor ventilation equipment. They came out very sick, and then I think they sent in 3 younger workers who also got very sick. The first 3 died. I think the last 3 were able to recover, but they preserved a sample of this bat virus that was able to jump to humans. But and I think Xi Jinping was actually like one of the leads on researching this virus. It kind of made her career and sparked this whole interest in heading off the threat of like bat viruses. But as they realized at the time, this was not a particularly contagious virus. Like the main reason it attacked these guys so heavily is because they were basically just like marinating in it for 3 days in an unventilated shaft, and just like huge concentrations of it, like shoveling bat guano. And so they basically received such a overwhelming viral load that it overwhelmed their immune system and killed them. But it's not the kind of thing where, like, if that exact virus, Rat G13, had gotten out somehow and, like, somebody went to a wet market and, like, spread it to other people, like, maybe a few people would have gotten sick. But it wasn't optimized to bind to human cells the way COVID does. And it was very hard. So it's like, it wasn't, the virus itself was not, like, a clear and present danger, but it was very effective at attacking humans in high loads. So people thought it was worth researching. And then where the gain of function comes in, and there were multiple grants over the 2010s from NIH, which was, basically run by Dr. Fauci. And then also there was like more subterranean money from DARPA, from the Pentagon, and from US aid, a lot of it funneling through EcoHealth Alliance to sponsor the research in Wuhan in the lab, looking into these bat coronaviruses. What people basically are saying is that they were doing gain-of-function research on Rat G13 and ones like it to optimize it and see if
ones that just ignored and hadn't even been flagged, like so many different novel coronaviruses. That's what Drastic kind of discovered. That like they kind of like covered up all these things, and Xi Zhengli was just like, it is a conspiracy theory.
Yeah, it's good. But then if you look even just before the thing with the field trial, under the approach thing on host pathogen prediction, a couple of things they say they want to do. One is integrated field sampling, viral characterization and modeling, in-depth sampling of bat SARS-CoVs in high-risk sites of active spillover, Yunnan, China. Spatial models, or I think that says spatial, using bat and viral data to estimate SARS-CoV jump potential across Asia, spatial viral spillover risk, mobile app, etc. And this one's interesting, experimental assays to test QS0, I guess that must be the specific spike, QS0 jump potential. Sequence QS0 spike protein similarity to high-risk SARS-CoVs. Model spike structure to assess ACE2 binding. That's the human receptor that the COVID spike, that the COVID virus binds to. Then in vitro and ACE2 humanized mouse experiments. Use results to test machine learning genotype to phenotype model predictions of viral spillover risk. And genotype-phenotype models to estimate evolutionary recombination rates, capacity to generate future QS capable of human infection based on spike protein diversity, recombination frequency, etc., and validation with previously connected human sera. Use LIPS assays that target specific SARS-CoV spikes to identify spillover of these strains in a high-risk population in Yunnan, China. So right there, they're talking about fucking around with the spike proteins to assess how well they bind to the ACE2 receptors, which is, and then, basically make humanized mice that I guess have that receptor and experiment it on them.
Yes.
And I mean, it sounds like they're doing some gain of function.
Oh, definitely they are. There's no doubt that they were doing gain of function. And
even though they lied that they like, I think Daszak even testified to Congress, and Fauci did as well, that they use very slippery language that we have never founded gain of function research in the Wuhan lab. What he means is that we gave money to EcoHealth, and EcoHealth funded the research, which means that we weren't funding it. I mean, come on.
But they definitely were doing gain of function research by any standard. Like, literally that thing that I said before, this is basically just like similar to what you said. This is like from Vanity Fair again. In October 2014, the Obama administration imposed a moratorium on new funding for gain-of-function research projects that could make influenza, MERS, or SARS viruses more virulent and transmissible. But a footnote to the statement announcing the moratorium carved out an exception for cases deemed urgently necessary to protect the public health and national security. And, by the way, like, they actually had gotten, like, funding from NIH, like, before the moratorium even, like Peter Daszak and EcoHealth. But anyway, so in the first year of the Trump administration, the moratorium was lifted and replaced with a review system called HHS-PCO framework for potential pandemic pathogen care and oversight. It put the onus for ensuring the safety of any such research on the federal department or agency funding it. This left the review process shrouded in secrecy. The names of the reviewers are not released, and the details of the experiments are considered to be largely secret, said the Harvard epidemiologist Dr. Mark Lipsitch, whose advocacy against gain-of-function research helped prompt the moratorium. An NIH spokesperson told Vanity Fair that information about individual unfunded applications is not public to preserve confidentiality and protect sensitive information, preliminary data, and intellectual property. So this is the sort of thing. Inside the NIH, which funded such research, the P3CO framework was largely met with shrugs and eye rolls, said a longtime agency official. If you ban gain-of-function research, you ban all of virology, he added. Ever since the moratorium, everyone's gone wink, wink, and just done gain-of-function research anyway. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's there's somebody we'll get to later who has a connection to EcoHealth, who is what is his name? David Franz, who just so happened to be the commander of Fort Detrick, our main bioweapons facility in Maryland in the late 1990s. There's some interesting connections like the Anthrax false flag attacks, but I found a lecture that he had given in 2016 where he, and this is while the moratorium was still active, where he repeatedly complains about the onerous regulations on science and research, and basically kind of essentially says, and this is a lecture, by the way, about gain-of-function issues and dual-use concerns, but basically is like, what are you going to do? Regulate all this away? I think he says literally at one point, and is really encouraging about sponsoring. He even name drops Ralph Barrick, who is one of the people that was listed on this study proposal out of UNC Chapel Hill. And he says, we really need to do gain of function work on MERS, which Ralph Barrick is doing great stuff on, but I think he's been shut down by the regulators who don't understand science and all this kind of stuff. And I mean, this guy, I think, is on the advisory board of EcoHealth Alliance. So we'll maybe circle back to that later. He mentions a lot of things in it.
These are the same people who are like, they're like Monsanto advocates or whatever. They're like, it's
definitely
anti-science to, be skeptical of GM. But as you said, like, they got a ton of money. It's crazy. Like, Zhang Li got like 1.2 million of U.S. money, like, in her. And she listed it on her CV, which is just absolutely nuts. Yeah, as you mentioned, Defense Department of Homeland Security.
Yeah, and we can't like rule out the perverse financial incentives that exist at like every step in this process that do not seem to redound to the benefit of like serious science. It's like the perverse incentives of basically they are chasing grant money from the government. They are just like little piggies, like waiting for that DARPA trough to fill up. And of course they're going to be simpatico with DARPA. And it's like, who the fuck even know? Like, DARPA would be on the high list of like institutions I do not fucking trust, no matter what they're doing. Like this is where we got like the robot dogs. This is where we got the internet. This is where we got, I mean, go down the list. Like probably energy weapons and like whatever fucking technology causes the Vanna syndrome that we're probably doing to ourselves. Like who the fuck knows? But
did you get a chance to look at the grant rescindment or like the reinstatement
rejection
of the grant? No, like when first the NIH within the NIH like withdrew the Daszak grant to study back coronaviruses that he had.
Was that in 2020 when Trump did that?
Yeah, basically Trump did that.
I remember
like,
that.
Some
and it was like Trump's anti-science.
Yeah,
and
some reporter was like, Mr.
Was,
Trump, like, why did we give all this money to China to fund this virus? And Trump was like, what? Like, I'm going to end that right away. But it got reinstated, but like the NIH's like concerns list is like truly amazing. Like the list of concerns they gave, they're like, this is what you need to do in order to get your grant back. They said, provide an aliquot of the actual SARS-CoV-2 virus that WIV used to determine the viral sequence. 2, explain the apparent disappearance of Huang Yanling, a scientist/technician who worked in the WIV lab, but whose lab web presence has been deleted. That's my favorite one, because that was like a whole thing that like came up on like Chinese social media too. This is like allegedly like patient zero, and like she just vanished off the internet, and then like it was all just written off because there was like some letter from like someone was like, I am her former professor. She has moved to a new like institute, and she is happy and working. Like everything is fine. Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Okay.
Provide the NIH with WIV's responses to 2018 U.S. Department of State cables regarding safety concerns. Disclose and explain ad ordinary restrictions on laboratory facilities as suggested, for example, by diminished cell phone traffic in October 2019, and the evidence that there may have been roadblocks surrounding the facility from October 14 to 19, 2019. 5, explain why WIV failed to note that the rat G13 virus, the bat-derived coronavirus and its collection with the greatest similarity to SARS-CoV-2, was actually isolated from an abandoned mine where 3 men died in 2012 with an illness remarkably similar to COVID-19, and explain why this was not followed up. 6, additionally, EcoHealth Alliance must arrange for WIV to submit to an outside inspection team charged to review the lab facilities and lab records with specific attention to addressing the question of whether the Wuhan Institute of Virology staff had SARS-CoV-2 in their possession prior to December 2019. The inspection team should be granted full access to review the processes and safety of procedures of all WIV fieldwork, including but not limited to the collection of animals and biospecimens in caves, abandoned man-made underground cavities, and outdoor sites. The inspection team could be organized by NIAID or, if preferred, the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. Lastly, EcoHealth Alliance must ensure that all of its sub-awards are fully reported in the federal sub-award reporting system. So, that's like a hilarious list of requirements. Yeah, like why did... Yeah, but that's a whole thing. I don't know. Have you also like heard about like the whole like military games thing?
Yes, I've heard. I remember that way back in 2020 that some people speculated on from a bunch of different angles that this might have been the actual patient zero release because a lot of countries had military men there, and the nature of the military, they all bunk together, they're all in close quarters,
right?
They're all wrestling and getting close to each other all the time. And, so if you wondered, like, maybe how did it get to Italy? How did it get to, like, France? How did it get to America first? Because I think, we found it earlier on, like, the West Coast than we initially thought. So there's and the version that took off in New York was actually, like, the Italian variant, right? Like it actually, like the one that hit the Northeast in the spring of 2020, I believe like that primarily came from Europe, but then, that came from China at some point. And I mean, if somebody would have wanted to release it at that point, when was that? Like in October?
Yeah, October 2019.
And they said they had roadblocks outside of the WIV in October?
That apparently was, something that... Well, a lot of people actually... Because, I was looking up into the military games thing recently, and they, like, a lot of the athletes, like, started to come forward and be like, it was weird, like, during that time that we were there. Like, there were... like like they made us like sanitize our hands at the airport, like it was like a ghost town, like and a lot of them said like, yeah, my whole team got sick afterwards. You know, I thought it was a really bad cold, but I'm not sure what it was. Yeah,
Weird.
It was, you know, I mean, China, like, I think that they kind of, like, were boosting that for a while because, you know,
they were.
As we talked about, like, everyone is like, it's the CCP, like, they did this as, like, a bioweapon, we have to declare war on them, or whatever, you know, like...
I did see some things in media that China, like, kind of early on was, like, particularly whenever Trump would go off and talk shit, they would sort of be like, well, maybe you guys, like, released it on purpose to, like, ruin us.
They would do the same thing. Yeah, they basically, they had their own version of that, which is that, like, it didn't come from China. Like the U.S. like brought it there with their soldiers. Like,
it was from Fort Detrick
type thing. Yeah,
which, you know, we do have a commander of Fort Detrick involved with
but it
EcoHealth
seems,
Alliance.
but it seems like the Wuhan
time.
Institute of Virology is basically like a U.S. like outpost in many ways.
Exactly. That's like, the big misdirection, the shitcoat that I feel like people like Tucker and even the Newsweek articles, they lead with like basically you know, like Pentagon denies funding like gain-of-function research at the Wuhan lab. And, you know, basically they kind of spin it in a way. It's like, well, we got this proposal, but no, it was too irresponsible. So we said no. And it's like, oh, good for DARPA. But then we don't know what the Chinese did, you know, and I don't know exactly, like, because, I mean, the one thing I guess, you know, the Pinocchio givers could say to us is like, well, you know, this was just a proposal and they didn't actually, you know, do these experiments. Though I think we can all agree if they had done them, it would be super dangerous and fucked up.
What you described isn't too different from the NIH proposal that they got approved. It's pretty much the same. Like, if you look at, like, their NIH proposal that's, like, on The Intercept, like the one from 2014... it's pretty much the same stuff. Like, nothing like that you mentioned like really jumps out at me as
well. I think the main thing is going to caves and like injecting bats with experimental vaccine with mRNA vaccines and then dropping like aerosolized dispensers of like chimeric COVID viruses in there to see how well they do. Like, that's an out of the lab experiment with an airborne virus. Like, that is pretty insane. I haven't seen any even like a serious scientist come out yet and defend that as just like a proposal of like a responsible experiment to do. And maybe it's the kind of thing where nobody wanted to be caught on paper saying yes to that. I don't know.
It's like it's known basically that they did do that. Like,
I would reasonably assume that they ended up doing that through whether DARPA later funded
like
it.
Admitted to doing it in like Chinese media, in like science journals. She said that she's like done experiments with humanized mice and things like that. Like,
but has she done it with bats in like caves outside of a laboratory?
I'm not,
because that would seem like that's a pretty big difference. Like, this is a level 4 virology lab. This is the highest level of security that exists.
But they definitely did it at like level 1, and they definitely did experiments at level 2, like with these things.
That's true.
Like,
they did, especially
their security
in the US
was not good. Yeah,
no,
they definitely were doing stuff
but
at
even
level
still,
2,
even if it was like the shittiest level 1 lab, you have to. We must concede that going out to a cave in the wild is like a totally different situation than doing something in a lab, regardless of what you're like. It's way more risky. Like, what if a bat like leaves the cave? Like, you know what I mean? Like what? Like, how do you control that? Like, how do you control the movement of like hundreds of bats?
Did you hear about like the BBC team that like went to like in 2020? Like, they went to that mine shaft that like started Xi Zhongli's career.
Wasn't there like a truck broken down in front of the road?
Yeah, there was like a mysterious truck there, and they were like followed by like, you know, mysterious like plainclothes cops or something.
Like Chinese CCP MIBs.
CCP MIBs.
Yeah, following them around. Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely something going on with the Chinese government here, and like they're definitely not showing their full hand.
They're complicit, like they know what's up, but like so is the U.S. government, you know. Like,
and I think that's the more important. Like, I feel like that's the more important driver here in terms of like who was really banging the drum for this research and who was shelling out millions of dollars. It was the Pentagon. So, you know, and like what better partnership to have where you can get up close to the Chinese and then oops, like this big horrible thing happens that starts a global pandemic, but it's like on their soil. So just inherently the world, if anybody's going to blame a country, it's going to be China.
Yeah.
You know, like most people aren't going to scratch beneath the surface and see like, oh, but like this lab was doing, it's almost confusing. Like it sort of violates our sense of like geopolitical rivalry that
it does.
DARPA and the Chinese because like people like Tucker say all the time,
that's key.
like the Chinese military was funding research. You know,
this is what I mean where I say like the politicization like makes it so impossible to like see through like the haze to like talk about this because like like the fact is that like they were like Shi Zhongli is a member of like an honorary member of like the American Academy of like Microbial Sciences or something, I don't remember exactly what it is, like microbiology, something like that. Microbial sciences kill me, but anyway, like it is like an international collaboration, like I don't know like who had knowledge, like it's all very murky, like how this happened, like maybe it truly was an accident. Definitely could be. It even could be
that's
zoonotic,
that's what I mean is like this actually throws a whole new interesting array of possibilities into the mix as to like how this virus could have gotten out, because when we talk about lab leaks, you think about like the beginning of like one of those movies like Outbreak or something where like a guy is like, oh, he like tears his like hazmat suit on like a nail on the door or something, and then oh my god, he's infected, and then it gets literally gets out of a lab. But in this case they were openly talking about bringing it out of a lab and then creating these like almost like out of like some terrorism thriller movie, like some state-of-the-art like aerosolized bomb thing you could like chuck in a cave that would just spray out this aerosolized version of like a gain of functioned bat coronavirus to test out all kinds of things with it. And at that point, like all it would take was then it's almost like the zoonotic origin theory that people like Peter Daszak espouse and cling to. Their theory could be true from there, but of course they're omitting the thing of like, well, how did that specific optimized bat coronavirus get into the bat in the first place? Now, of course, it's still, if they sprayed it there, like they could have sprayed it at all kinds of places. They could have sprayed it at the military games. Like, it's really hard to say exactly. I mean, maybe in time we'll get more like nuggets of information, but maybe not. But it doesn't even require a kind of like the propensity for accidents, like the potential for an accidental release of this thing. It was like their plan to release it out in an open environment. Maybe they thought it was safe because it was like a rural cave or something like that. But you just never know. I mean, like, I don't know, like it just feels like so risky. And so it expands the possibility that it's somewhere along that chain, if they did in fact go and start spraying this in caves to like infect a bunch of bats, then it could have gotten out in a kind of accidental way subsequently to that. It's still their fault. Like they still did it. And at the same time, it also like, it's God, if they're just driving around China with all these like virus canisters and shit and doing all kinds of crazy experiments, like it doesn't take much. I mean, people forget that, the anthrax attacks in 2001, still not definitively solved. But what is solved is that was not an Islamic terrorist who wrote like "Death to Israel," like Allah rules, whatever. Yeah. It was a government insider.
Allah is great, right?
Yeah, Allah is great. It was at one of the biosecurity labs that run by the U.S. government itself, run by the Pentagon, that was doing biowarfare research on anthrax. Like they traced the anthrax spores back to one of their laboratories. So the idea that, and who knows, well, maybe it was a disgruntled scientist, maybe it was something else. I mean, it is worth mentioning that right after the anthrax attacks, the funding for infectious diseases and biodefense and shit, I think it went from somewhere like maybe a couple $100 million a year to like $5 billion or something like that. Like an absolute gold rush for all these guys, all these scientists. Everybody from Fauci to Peter Daszak and all the way, and David Franz, all the way down. So yeah, shit happens like that, doesn't it? Sometimes it's accidental. Sometimes all it takes is one malicious actor, for whatever reason you want to ascribe to them, to go and release this thing that if they worked at the lab, they might know is very pathogenic and transmissible by humans. And so all you have to do is like take one of those aerosol like grenades and just like boop like in a fucking movie. Do it at the Wuhan thing. Do it at the military games. Do it in a bar. I don't know. Like put it in the ventilation system somewhere in a crowded city in Wuhan, and then poof, there you go. It's out in the public now, and it's been optimized well enough to actually spread. Unlike Rat G13 in 2012, where even if they had done that, that virus wouldn't have. It would have been more like SARS in 2003, where I think a few hundred people ended up dying from it, but it wasn't particularly contagious, you know, nowhere near as much as COVID-19. But yeah, I mean, so wait, let's talk a minute maybe about the head of EcoHealth Alliance, Peter Daszak. Mm-hmm. This character, there's so much with him, but I don't know. What was your impression of Peter Daszak as an individual on the sus to satanic ratio?
Well, like all these people seem like very sus and like unscrupulous. Like it was bizarre that they like wrote that like letter, like, you know, protesting like that Lancet letter.
Yes,
I think
that is very sus.
Yeah. And then they all like kind of went behind like, you know, like went behind the scenes and were like, oh, you know, we shouldn't sign it. Peter Daszak was the only one who did sign it, and then he had to be like, you know, they wrote in the letter like, oh, we don't have any like conflicts of interest, but then he had to be like, oh wait, actually I totally do have a conflict of interest, but he like was emailing with like Barrick and she and all those other people.
It looks a lot like controlling the narrative. He did that very early, in like April 2020. He published this like thing over 20-something serious scientists in the Lancet, and saying like, yeah, we condemn. I love the language of this because it's so similar to everything you hear on like reinforced on like CNN every day and stuff. He says, the rapid, open, and transparent sharing of data on this outbreak is now being threatened by rumors and misinformation around its origins. We stand together to strongly condemn conspiracy theories suggesting that COVID-19 does not have a natural origin. Scientists from multiple countries have published and analyzed genomes of the causative agent, severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, and they overwhelmingly conclude that this coronavirus originated in wildlife, as have so many other emerging pathogens. This is further supported by a letter from the presidents of the U.S. National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, and by the scientific communities they represent. Conspiracy theories do nothing but create fear, rumors, and prejudice that jeopardize our global collaboration in the fight against this virus. We support the call from the Director General of WHO to promote scientific evidence and unity over misinformation and conjecture. We want you, the science and health professionals of China, to know that we stand with you in your fight against this virus. We invite others to join us in supporting the scientists, public health professionals, and medical professionals of Wuhan and across China. Stand with our colleagues on the front line. We speak in one voice. And blah, blah, blah. We declare no competing interests. Very cool. So he was out there like,
no competing interests, yeah. And
no
like just behind the scenes, you know, Daszak, like there was a freedom of information request, and they like, you know, got some emails from him, and he wrote a subject with the subject line, no need for you to sign the statement, Ralph, he wrote to Ralph Barrick. And he said, you, me, and him should not sign this statement, so it has some distance from us and therefore doesn't work in a counterproductive way. That's Daszak. So we'll then put it out in a way that doesn't link it back to our collaboration, so we maximize an independent voice. Barrick agreed, writing back, otherwise it looks self-serving and we lose impact. But
the way these people are able to talk about,
like, yeah, like fuck you, like, you know, that's guilty as hell to do.
Yeah, that's extreme. Like, and you know, like not only like Ralph Barrick, who is like a huge weirdo, who there's a really great New York Magazine article that I went back and reread. It was from January 4th, 2020. That's why the FBI had to send in the Capitol riots to just get so nobody would read this article, but quite good, by Nicholson Baker, called The Lab Leak Hypothesis. And it's like very in depth, but it, you know, it goes into Peter Daszak, it goes into Ralph Barrick, and how Ralph Barrick, I think he says that he wrote a, quote, long, fairly creepy paper from 2006 on how you could weaponize viruses, synthetic viral genomics, which actually was protested, I think, at the time by a lot of other scientists. And he also bragged multiple times about how he had created a seamless, what he called the no-seum method of creating chimera viruses that look completely natural and showed no signs of editing or gain of function.
Apparently it didn't work because COVID does have suspicious features that people have pointed out.
It does. We got to talk about that furin cleavage site, don't we?
Yeah, the furin cleavage site. That is odd. Even one guy, he kind of walked it back. He got a lot of pressure for it, but there was a pretty prominent biologist. He's had a couple of controversies in his career, but he did come forward and say that it seemed kind of a smoking gun of COVID's origins, that furin cleavage site. And it is weird. I guess he's I regret saying smoking gun, without necessarily saying that it wasn't engineered, but he's still I forget what
the New York Magazine article actually mentions Sam Husseini, who's kind of an old school I feel like Code Pink, Cindy Sheehan kind of counterpunch journalist, but whatever. But he's been kind of a rabid dog on this COVID thing all the way through, and he wrote a pretty good takedown of the Pentagon funding of EcoHealth Alliance. But back in January, it mentions here that he was at a conference at the National Press Club in February 2020, and he asked a question of the CDC's representative, Anne Schuchat, where the virus had come from. And he said later his head was spinning. Obviously, the main concern is how to stop the virus. Nonetheless, he wanted to know about its source. Is it the CDC's contention that there's absolutely no relation to the BSL-4 lab in Wuhan? It's my understanding this is the only place in China with a BSL-4 lab. We in the U.S. have, I think, 24 or so, and there have been problems and incidents. Husseini hastened to say he wasn't implying that what happened with Wuhan is anyway intentional. I'm just asking, is it a coincidence? Schuchat thanked Husseini for his questions and comments. Everything she'd seen was consistent with a natural zoonotic origin for the disease, she said. But that same month, a group of French scientists from Marseille University posted a paper describing their investigation of a small insertion in the genome in the new SARS-2 virus. The virus's spike protein contained a sequence of amino acids that formed what Etienne de Crowley and colleagues called, quote, a peculiar furin-like cleavage site, a chemically sensitive region on the lobster claw of the spike protein that would react in the presence of an enzyme called furin, which is a type of protein found everywhere within the human body, but especially in the lungs. When the spike senses human furin, it shudders, chemically speaking, and the enzyme opens the protein, commencing the tiny morbid ballet whereby the virus burns a hole in a host cell's outer membrane and finds its way inside. The code for this particular molecular feature, not found in SARS or any SARS-like bad viruses, but present in a slightly different form in the more lethal MERS virus, which Daszak and Barrick heavily researched for years, is easy to remember because it's a ROR, R-R-A-R. The letter code stands for amino acids, arginine, alanine, and arginine. Its presence, so de Crowley and its colleagues observed, may heighten the pathogenicity, that is the god-awfulness, of the disease. Botao Zhao, a professor at the South China University of Technology, posted a short paper on a preprint server titled The Possible Origins of 2019 nCoV Coronavirus. Two laboratories, the Wuhan Center for Disease Control and Prevention and the Wuhan Institute of Virology, were not far from the seafood market, which was where the disease was said to have originated, Zhao wrote. In fact, the WHCDC was only a few hundred yards away from the market, whereas the horseshoe bats that hosted the disease were hundreds of miles to the south. No bats were sold in the market, he pointed out. It was unlikely, he wrote, that a bat would have flown to a densely populated metropolitan area of 15 million people. The killer coronavirus probably originated from a laboratory in Wuhan, Zhao believed. He urged the relocation of, quote, biohazardous laboratories away from densely populated places. His article disappeared from the server. And late in the month, a professor at National Taiwan University, Feng-Shi Tai, gave a lecture on the coronavirus in which he described the anomalous RRAR furin cleavage site. The virus was, quote, unlikely to have 4 amino acids added all at once, Fang said. Natural mutations were smaller and more haphazard, he argued. quote, from an academic point of view, it is indeed possible that the amino acids were added to COVID-19 in the lab by humans. When the Taiwan News published an article about Fang's talk, Fang disavowed his own comments, and the video copy of the talk disappeared from the website of the Taiwan Public Health Association. It has been taken down for a certain reason, the association explained. Thank you for your understanding.
Okay, nice.
Okay, so that's
Love
like
it.
right at the beginning, you had like a bunch of scientists from different places basically arguing that, you know, I guess you had South China University of Technology, which I think, I don't know if that's Hong Kong or China, but then you also had Taiwan, and then you had people in France, and everybody was looking at this, and yeah, like the other scientists said, was like, this looks like a smoking gun. This isn't natural. Basically, if you imagine the furin cleavage site and the spike protein, it's almost like it's like a key, and there's, you know, all kinds of different variations in nature of the shape of that key. But it just so happens that COVID-19 has the perfect key that unlocks access to like a human cell, particularly in the lungs, which feels like not natural. But again, because Dr. Ralph Baric has bragged since the mid-2000s about how he's invented the no-seum technique of virus editing in gain-of-function research, there wouldn't be like, I don't know, the equivalent of like a jagged stitch of like, aha, they did it. You know what I mean? But it's like the properties of it are suspicious because that is not typically how natural evolution works, right?
Yeah, that guy, the guy who I mentioned, you know, he was quoted in a piece by Nicholas Wade, who like I think is a controversial guy because he's like kind of like a weird like race science dude, but you know, it doesn't mean that he's incapable of pointing out things. And he did quote someone who's not a race science dude, David Baltimore, who was, you know, former president of Caltech, a very eminent virologist. And what he said was, when I first saw the furin cleavage site in the viral sequence with its arginine codons, I said to my wife it was a smoking gun for the origin of the virus. These features make a powerful challenge to the idea of a natural origin for SARS-2. Yeah.
Well, so, you know, first impressions there.
Yeah, and, you know, I think he only, like, sort of said, like, well, you know, I regret saying smoking gun, like, under a little bit of pressure. Like, you know, but I think that it's still, it gives, like, a clear indication. Like I said, you know, I went and I looked to see, like, how much of a smoking gun is it? Because that, to me, was something that stood out, you know, that this prominent guy was like, it's a smoking gun. So I looked it up and I saw like some articles like, no, it is not, you know, like, etc. I saw so many no articles like during this. Like, in fact, I even found like a reformed like no person who like had a whole career of like writing like, no, COVID-19 did not. But then like she was like, wait a minute, like, you know, like it started to not add up. And she like, you know, started to have doubts like after it being like a career like no comma
a
article
no writer.
Person. Yeah, exactly.
Wow, that's a whole like subcategory beat of you know, like BuzzFeed journalists now is just to write those articles like the no ringer. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so I found a no article, and in the no article they were like, you know, they were like, in fact, these like, you know, furin cleavage can like hyperlink be generated hyperlink naturally hyperlink, and like, you know, you had to go manually and click to like each like, you know, thing trying to show you like an overwhelming amount of evidence. But you know, when I looked at them, what a lot of those things were saying was like, you know, that it doesn't prove that it was, you know, a engineered virus, and it's possible that it could, like, you know, here is a way that it could have come about naturally. So but that's still like, you know, an elaborate theory, like in many cases. You know, one of these articles said strains of SARS-CoV-2 have furin cleavage sites at spike S1, S2. Moreover, SARS-CoV-2 is the only virus in subgenus Sarbecovirus having this feature, while even its closest relatives, and rat G13 and pangolin coronaviruses, do not have the furin site. And another article in that same vein, that first one, let me just say the title. It was furin cleavage sites naturally occur in coronaviruses. So this is like, you know, providing a way where they could show that there were some furin cleavage sites in coronaviruses and how they could naturally occur. And this other one, a palindromic RNA sequence is a common breakpoint contributor to copy choice recombination in SARS-CoV-2, you know, and both of these articles are very much directed towards like rebutting like they were very conscious of the lab theory. It starts off like, much remains unknown concerning the origin of novel pandemic coronavirus that has raged across the globe since emerging in Wuhan of Hubei province, near the center of the People's Republic of China in December 2019. All current members of the family Coronaviridi have arisen by a combination of incremental adaptive mutations against the backdrop of many recombinational effects throughout the past, rendering each a unique mosaic of RNA sequences from diverse sources. The consensus among virologists is that the manufactured consensus is that the base sequence of the novel coronavirus, designated SARS-CoV-2, was derived from a common ancestor of bat coronavirus, represented by the strain rat G13, isolated in Yunnan province in 2013. Into that ancestral genetic background, several recombination events have since occurred from other divergent bat-derived coronaviruses, resulting in localized discordance between the two. One such event left SARS-CoV-2 with a receptor binding domain capable of binding the human ACE2 receptor lacking in rat G13, and a second event uniquely added to SARS-CoV-2 a specific site for furin, capable of efficient endoproteolytic cleavage and activation of the spike glycoprotein responsible for virus entry and cell fusion. This paper demonstrates by bioinformatic analysis that such recombinational events are facilitated by short oligonucleotide breakpoint sequences similar to CAGAC that direct recombination naturally to certain positions in the genome at the boundaries between blocks of RNA code and potentially RNA structure. This breakpoint sequence hypothesis, quote-unquote, provides a natural explanation for the biogenesis of SARS-CoV-2 over time and in the wild.
So they got their magic bullet theory.
Right, exactly. This is basically like kind of a magic bullet theory, but they did say the SARS-CoV-2 and HKU9 sequences can be aligned as 9 identities in a span of 28 nucleotides of HKU9 with minimal gaps. While not perfect, this does support the hypothesis that the entire furin insert may have been derived by recombination from an as-yet unsampled coronavirus, mediated by the presence of CAGAC as the lead nucleotide in both progenitor viruses, with other palindromic oligonucleotides as contributors. A recent bat coronavirus isolate from Yunnan also has an apparent insert at the S1, S2 border, PAA rather than PRRA, supporting the concept of a natural insertion at the site. However, this insert is far too dissimilar to the RNA sequence encoding the S protein of SARS-CoV-2 to be at all closely related in origin and therefore does not contribute an endoproteolytic site for furin. So basically, again, there's like this ancestor of COVID that just doesn't exist, that they can't find. No one knows where it is. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like rat G13 seems to be like the more distant ancestor of this virus.
It definitely is related to that.
A missing link somewhere where it just perfect furin spike was just like grafted into it to make it perfectly infect human lung cells.
Yes, and it just, really, somehow came about. Yeah.
And it was just only the leading experts on the people who do that for a living and are like almost messianically attached to doing that and have like lobbied the government for millions of dollars.
Yeah, like doing gain of function research and how they need freedom and putting viruses in bats and measuring them and like all the risks involved. Yeah, I'm like reading this NIH thing over again just to see like the... if they did mention going into caves. I mean, they did, but they didn't talk about, like, releasing bats into the caves or anything like that. So that
but also the NIH stuff was earlier, so I feel like what you get in the leaked documents from Drastic is that there's a lot of references to previous research they've already done leading up to 2018, and I guess the people that have sort of analyzed it have said that there's like multiple references to the fact that they've been doing gain of function research, that they've been, and also the really interesting thing is like developing mRNA vaccines, right? They were already partnering with Moderna back in 2018 to develop a sort of pan-coronavirus vaccine based on an mRNA platform. So it's interesting that the bat experiments actually sounded like primarily they weren't doing it to test the pathogenicity of the
chimera. They wanted to vaccinate the bats.
They wanted to vaccinate the bats, and they wanted to test in a realistic environment how effective is this Moderna mRNA vaccine in a bat cave. And that, to me, that just jumps out as like, you create a problem and then you sell everybody the solution to the problem because you already got it ready to go. I mean, they did create these things in like 1 year, which ironically they use as a selling point to be like, it's not new. We've been working on this, but there's like a perverse potential incentive there where you're developing this thing.
At the very least, the idea that it was, I mean, it could be in a way like, the maliciousness or like the intentional release like does even, involves less coincidence almost. But I would say at the very least, like, the lab leak and resulting cover up is very compelling. I mean, honestly, the deliberate release like also has things to recommend it, like, but I don't know. The lab, there's a lot of suspicious stuff like around. There
is, and almost a little bit like 9/11 when I think we engage in a healthy discourse. I think we lost one patron after you suggested that the towers were not brought down by
excuse me,
explosives.
is that why we lost them? I can't believe. You know what? I know that you think that. I'm seeing 624 patrons right now. Remember when we were at 88 patrons? I can't believe the fact that you said that means like you were holding it in your mind that like it was my fault that we lost a single.
No,
patron.
I'm saying that's what they said. That's what they said.
Oh my God! Did they really say that?
No, look at the comments. Yeah.
Oh, well, I can't read the comments because I don't subscribe to our own Patreon.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll screenshot it for you. But a lot of people went in and yelled at him when he denounced us for saying that there was a void at the center of the World Trade Center. But anyways, I think that when you say that everything was arranged in such a way that 9/11 was an inevitability, that it like had to happen. And maybe this is even going back to like the construction of the World Trade Center, but also the entire paradigm of like national security and all like just this weird, creepy sense that the U.S. government deeply wanted and like needed something like this to happen. There are certain parallels, I think, with COVID, but also like with this research, which was so obsessed, the whole raison d'etre of like Peter Daszak and Ralph Barrick and all these people was to prevent the next pandemic. They even had, I watched a few ads which were like very ridiculous and like cringy from EcoHealth Alliance. And there was one, I think from maybe 2018, the same year he was proposing this reckless shit that was literally titled like EcoHealth Alliance, standing between you and the next pandemic. So, and basically that's what he says like in the commercial and his like creepy British accent.
Well, that's what a lot of this like disease X stuff was all about. Like, eventually they all knew that eventually there's going to be a pandemic, probably from a coronavirus. And that was like what
it's not a matter of when. It's not a matter of if. It's a matter of when. And like Fauci would say this, they were all had it like they definitely had this belief, or they certainly wanted to instill this belief that, I watched another very layers of sus video, an interview from like 2018 where Greta Van Susteren was interviewing Dr. Fauci for Voice of America. Which is just like, she's a Scientologist, like it's on Voice of America, which is CIA, like, there's just so many layers. But it's almost like I forgot that Fauci was kind of popping up in the media all these years, like whenever you need to talk about a potential pandemic. And there were all these like false start, almost like the towers getting bombed in 93. There were like these little trial runs of like, and I remember even the like hysteria that the media kind of tried to gin up back when it was like avian flu, H1N1, H5N1. Oh my God. Zika. Remember Zika? Peter Daszak was like very invested, both literally and figuratively in that.
And Ebola too.
Ebola in Liberia, which is whenever anything horrible happens in Liberia, rest assured there's probably something sus going on. I'm just gonna leave it at that.
Didn't AIDS kind of like come through Liberia, like to Haiti, and like from Zaire to Liberia to Haiti?
That's interesting. Actually, I just saw that the other day. I think I shared it with you the other night. I went on a real nostalgia trip, and I found this like this kind of NIH, almost like one of those VHS like lectures you could order in the mail and like have sent to you. But it was a young, handsome Dr. Fauci in 1984 giving a lecture about AIDS. And that was really fascinating to watch. You can find it on YouTube. And it's fascinating because, I mean, he had some controversial shit with AIDS like early on. And I think even the gay rights kind of community had some very strong words for him in those early days. But you see that he was like, he's been this guy since the 80s. Like, he's the Mr. Explainer. I am the doctor.
Yes.
I'm the expert. And you can see he's like, really, he has a talent for it. I am so sick of seeing him, but I understand how he got to be like the J. Edgar Hoover of public health, which I think is really what he is. But then he does mention at a certain point, he's talking about the populations that are at risk, and he does bring up like the origins of AIDS. And he brings up the Haitian connection, which I feel like I've heard discussed on Dave Emery before, because Dave Emery is an AIDS truther, and I would say we'll get to it one day. I'm just going to leave it at that. We'll get to.
What I will say about AIDS is that AIDS is a great example of like the social dynamics, how those are inseparable from a like virulent pandemic or epidemic.
Oh,
because
absolutely.
like
Absolutely.
if it weren't for the fact that, which hasn't been the case like all the time, like when more gay people were in the closet or when like social mores were different, like AIDS wouldn't have been confined to gay communities in the same way. Like the way that it panned out, like it was very specific in the like the epidemiology that it eventually had.
It literally, and he does explain that, and he's like, is like, this doesn't mean that the male homosexual population is bad, but it's just an epidemiological fact. By nature of like sexual interaction, they did eventually pretty much figure that out. But it's like, that was interesting because that was a virus that almost seemed like aggressively targeted towards a couple very specific groups of people. And then later we found out that sub-Saharan African people had a particular susceptibility to dying and to contracting and dying from AIDS, whereas like certain subsets of pure Aryan blood people that had a certain gene that enabled them to survive the Black Plague, or the Black Death, were ultimately immune. And actually Fauci says this, interestingly, in his 84 presentation, that like, for reasons we don't understand, some people can be exposed to the virus that causes AIDS without they can be exposed but then not contract the virus and not exhibit any symptoms of full-blown AIDS, which is an official term back then, by the way.
Full-blown
AIDS. Full-blown AIDS was like what he called it. Yeah, full-blown AIDS.
Great.
It was like, because there's AIDS where you're like pre-symptomatic maybe for years, and then it like blows up.
AIDS. Great. Thank you.
But he kind of says that without like, but it's kind of true later on, like definitely with the African kind of genetic connection that it targeted that. It just starts to see like, who else in history like hated like black people, gays, like drug users, who was really into like unethical medical experimentation. Well, there's two I can think of, the United States and Nazi Germany. But, and just it had to, and then the social reaction that it provoked, because it was so directly linked to like a homosexual lifestyle or a drug using lifestyle, that you got an early sense of kind of what's coming back now with the way people are looking at the unvaccinated, trying to say, some people thinking that you should deny them. I think we talked about this in maybe our 9/11 episode, but basically, thinking that people should be thrown out on the street. Well, they were doing that to AIDS patients as well. They were firing from their job. I saw a little bit of another 80s like a kind of AIDS documentary that was a very like humanizing one, but there was like a whole rally of people with Stop LaRouche banners, like a huge rally, because it was during the time that LaRouche wanted to pass he was sponsoring a ballot initiative in California to throw HIV positive people in like quarantine camps and like make them carry around like HIV passports that like declared their status and shit. And thankfully that got defeated. But the Haitian connection that he brings up is, I don't think it involved Liberia, but it did involve Zaire. And he makes some kind of weird comment that almost like, he doesn't really get political, but sometimes you can hear like a tell where he's like, well, there were a lot of guest workers in Zaire in the 1970s when they were getting a lot of Western investment.
Part of that.
And after there was a revolution, and many of the industries were nationalized.
Oh no!
Yeah, like no, this is how every pandemic starts.
Yeah, it wasn't colonialism like in Africa. You know, it wasn't the
right,
fact
like
that Zaire
after,
used to be the Belgian Congo. Like that has nothing to do with it at all.
Yeah, right? Or like all the wars going on, like all the civil wars and like revolutionary conflicts happening at the time. Kind of interesting, kind of like a target area that like the CIA would be very interested in deploying bioweapons on. Anyways, basically somehow I guess this must have been in like the francophone part of Zaire, because then some of the individuals that were there, some of them went to Belgium and some of them went to Haiti, and then he claims that it sort of started like a mini outbreak in both of those countries. And then I forget if some of the Haitians then emigrated to like Miami, and then there was kind of an outbreak among the Haitian community there. But, you know, he pointed out that because they were not, this population were mostly not IV drug users or gay, so they weren't the traditional at risk. But so that's how. But he also throws out casually, well, you know, it actually. The first samples of the virus that causes AIDS were found in the early 1970s in Zaire. And I'm like, wait, what? Like, is that still believed? Or is that just something people were saying? Because I don't remember that being a part of the official story. Oh, I know that people say it came from Africa, but
I think people might say that AIDS is even older than that now.
Maybe they do, but I just have a lot of there was a kind of based East German scientist in the 80s that I think I want to say Dr. Siegel, who started publishing a lot of articles about how it was a U.S. bioweapon created at Fort Detrick and then unleashed upon the homosexual population, which is interesting because some of the very earliest cases, not big outbreaks, were in like Baltimore. You know, not far from D.C. and all that, but then also, you know, New York and San Francisco, where it did spread the way everyone, you know, understands that it did. But just like the tenuousness of that origin that he was saying in 1984 of like, yeah, well, it was in rural Central Africa, and then some guys must have caught it somehow, and then they went to these other countries. He still couldn't say that like that's how it got to America. He was just talking about why it popped up separately in Belgium and Haiti. But just as a side note, I don't know if you remember, I forget if I've mentioned this before, but there was an interesting documentary a few years ago called Cold Case Hammarskjöld, which was about the the potential assassination of, I think, the UN General Secretary Dag Hammarskjöld over the Congo in the early 1960s. His plane exploded. But this filmmaker who, he's done a couple things. A lot of it to do with kind of like shady, like post-colonial African. I think he's Danish or Dutch. And he wanted to get to the bottom of like, was, you know, Hammarskjöld assassinated by like Rhodesian or like South African intelligence or like the CIA or something. And I remember he found this very mysterious like South African like maritime research or like appreciation society that was actually like a covert action front for like South African apartheid special forces. And then he ended up interviewing a veteran of that organization that had fought in like Rhodesia and probably Angola and like other conflicts in the 70s and 80s. And that guy confesses on camera. I don't think he says that we created HIV. But he says that our guerrilla units would go into villages in places we were trying to like pacify or ethnically cleanse or whatever, and pose as health officials giving out free vaccinations. But they were actually injecting people with HIV. No. And he said something like that was considered the clean, respectful way to do genocide or something like that. I mean, this guy, I think his name was Alex Jones, but like not Alex Jones, you know. But like, no, he kind of looks like he's like really sketched out during the whole, like this guy looks like haunted and like a demon, kind of like the last Narc documentary. There was that like corrupt cop who was just like acting like he was possessed by the devil the whole time. And he was talking about this and was like, he was afraid to kind of say it, but was like, yeah, that's what we did. Like, we were trying to spread AIDS like around Africa and in the black population. So when you think about it that way, like regardless of kind of, people were thinking in this way in Africa in the period of time when AIDS, HIV allegedly just emerged out of the jungle. Yeah. And my God, you could talk about Ebola. I haven't looked close enough into Ebola to make a bold statement on that, but still, when you think about the potential nefariousness and when you cross over with like defense spending, biowarfare, they all claim that we shut down our biowarfare research in 1969, like Nixon did, but that's really not true. We weren't stockpiling anthrax, I think, after 1969. So maybe in that sense we stopped, but we didn't stop researching and creating shit. That we absolutely did not stop. And so then, it's kind of a clear line from that type of like DARPA, Pentagon type research to EcoHealth Alliance, particularly through David Franz, the guy who ran Fort Detrick in the 90s. And also, the great thing about David Franz was he was one of the inspectors that went to Iraq to look for WMDs and chemical weapons. Wow. And he's actually, he was very good friends with Judith Miller, the sketchy New York Times reporter that lied about WMDs. And he's actually one of the experts that was quoted in the early 2000s talking about Saddam's mobile chemical weapons labs and his mobile bioweapons labs and shit. Remember that Colin Powell was like showing grainy pictures of that? He was one of the sources for that shit. And, really hyping it up. So it's like, this is the caliber of people, of experts that we're fucking dealing with. And it's some dark shit.
This past Friday, a long-anticipated and much-debated report by the World Health Organization was delayed again. It was supposed to be a kind of post-mortem on a trip to China by a WHO-led team of international scientists, which took place earlier this year. The question, how did SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, originate? Among the leading theories examined, was it accidentally leaked from a lab in Wuhan, or did it come from infected animals in a wet market there? The WHO inquiry was far from comprehensive, because, as it has done since the beginning of the outbreak, the Chinese government withheld information. If the virus originated in animals, one of the mysteries has been, how did it travel the 1,000 miles from the bat caves in southern China to Wuhan? The WHO team thinks it found the answer.
What we found as part of this WHO mission to China is that there is a pathway.
Peter Daszak, a member of the WHO team and an expert on how animal viruses jump to humans, has worked on previous viral outbreaks, including in China. He says the pathway leads not to the lab in Wuhan, but from wildlife farms in southern China directly to the wet market in Wuhan, the Huanan seafood market.
The theory is that somehow that virus got from a bat into one of these wildlife farms, and then the animals were shipped into the market, and that they contaminated people while they were handling them, chopping them up, killing them, whatever you do before you cook an animal.
Wild animals?
Yeah.
Like what?
They're traditional food. Civets, these are like ferrets. There's also an animal called a ferret badger. Rabbits, which we know can carry the virus. Those animals were coming into the market from farms over 1,000 miles away.
Were you able to test any of the animals found in the Wuhan market for the virus?
Well, the China team had done that, and they found a few animals left in freezers. They tested them, they were negative. But the fact that those animals are there is the clue.
But there's no direct evidence that any of those animals were actually infected with the bat virus.
Correct. Now what we've got to do is go to those farms and investigate, talk to the farmers, talk to their relatives, test them, see if there were spikes in virus there first.
So the team doesn't actually know if any of the farmers or the truckers were ever infected.
No one knows it. No one's been there, no one's asked them, no one's tested them. That's to be done.
Despite those unanswered questions, the WHO team and their Chinese counterparts all agreed that this hypothesis of a pathway from bat caves to butcher shops like these is the most likely explanation.
Something like 75% of emerging diseases come from animals into people. We've seen it before. We've seen it in China with SARS.
Is the lab leak theory any more or less speculative than your pathway?
For an accidental leak that then led to COVID to happen, the virus that causes COVID would need to be in the lab. They never had any evidence of a virus like COVID in the lab.
They never had the COVID-19 virus
Not
in
prior
that
to the
lab?
outbreak, no. Absolutely. No evidence of that.
Jamie Metzel begs to differ, pointing to the lab's own reports that it sent field researchers to the bat caves who brought back samples with viruses.
We know that among those viruses, one of them is the virus that is genetically most related to the SARS-CoV-2 virus.
But most related isn't the same, right?
Yes, exactly. But we do know that there were 9 viruses, at least, that were brought back, and it's extremely possible that among these viruses is a virus that's much more closely related to the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And when I put all those pieces together, I said, hey, wait a second, this is a real possibility. We need to be exploring it.
The pathway that Peter Daszak and the team have come up with, now that sounds plausible.
Oh, it's certainly plausible.
Very seriously plausible.
No, it is plausible. Let's just say that that theory is correct. You would have had an outbreak perhaps in southern China where they have those animal farms. You may have seen some kind of evidence of an outbreak along the way.
And there wasn't?
There wasn't.
Metzel says Peter Daszak has a conflict of interest because of his longtime collaboration with the Wuhan lab.
I'm on the WHO team for a reason, and if you're going to work in China on coronaviruses and try and understand their origins, you should involve the people who know the most about that. And for better or for worse, I do.
He says the team did look into the leak theory during a visit with lab scientists and deemed it extremely unlikely.
We met with them, we said, do you audit the lab? And they said, annually. Did you audit it after the outbreak? Yes. Was anything found? No. Do you test your staff? Yes.
But you're just taking their word for it.
Well, what else can we do? There's a limit to what you can do, and we went right up to that limit. We asked them tough questions. They weren't vetted in advance, and the answers they gave we found to be believable, correct, and convincing.
But weren't the Chinese engaged in a cover-up? They destroyed evidence, they punished scientists who were trying to give evidence on this very question of the origin.
Well, that wasn't our task, to find out if China had covered up the origin
No, I know.
issue.
I'm just saying, doesn't that make you wonder?
We didn't see any evidence of any false reporting or cover-up in the work that we did in China.
Were there Chinese government minders in the room every time you were asking questions?
There were Ministry of Foreign Affairs staff in the room throughout our stay, absolutely. They were there to make sure everything went smoothly from the China side.
Or to make sure they were telling you the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
You sit in a room with people who are scientists, and you know what a scientific statement is, and you know what a political statement is. We had no problem distinguishing between the two.
Now I think it might be good to talk about some of these individuals a little more. One that I wasn't aware of until literally yesterday, but I did kind of a little bit of a deep dive on him last night, is the aforementioned David Franz, the former commander at Fort Detrick in the 90s. And I was able to confirm here, he is a science advisor to EcoHealth Alliance. It really runs the gamut. If you look at their partners and stuff, it's like NATO and
yeah,
every single research institution from Columbia, the University of Wisconsin, UC Davis, Princeton,
Tufts,
Harvard,
Brown,
Johns Hopkins, everybody is connected with this group, as well as the NIH, CDC, Pentagon, USAID, etc. And
yeah, they do lots of stuff in Southeast Asia, I guess, because one of their whole proposals was about doing work in Southeast Asia, and they seem to have a lot of sponsors in Thailand and Malaysia too, or academic.
Yeah, Peter Daszak, I think, built a biolab in Malaysia going back to maybe the early 2000s. He was actually the subject of an interesting 60 Minutes piece, I think in 2003, that they like revisited when COVID started, because Peter Daszak gave some prescient, chilling comments about what kept him up at night in the early 2000s. I think at the time he was in Malaysia studying MERS, and this is right after the SARS outbreak in China. And I think he said something basically along the lines of like, it is my greatest fear that a novel bat coronavirus will rampage out across the world as a result of human farming and development, and we'll be totally unprepared. And then what's his name from Scott? What's his name from 60 Minutes?
Like the
are
thing
absolutely
that
chilling.
To go back to like the inevitability thing, like it's just so odd that I guess like people didn't listen, but it seems like nobody ever listens to any of this stuff. And like you do hear about it, you do hear about like the climate issue, like, you know, it's something that people bring up again and again, but in very extreme terms. You know, it's often raised, but no one seems to be doing like anything really about it. It's just like constantly
but nonetheless,
reminding
actually,
us that it's looming. And then,
yeah.
You know.
Well, if you ever get Daszak, there's a lot of interviews with him, and if you can get him to talk about kind of, well, like how can we stop the next pandemic, because remember, he's the one standing between you and the next pandemic.
Right.
His two answers are basically like, give me a lot of money to do gain of function research and investigate like rare bat coronaviruses, and also like this will not cease to be a threat until we solve the industrial problems with the environment, et cetera. So he's one of these like kind of Extinction Rebellion friendly kind of guys who is, you know, like I said, he believes in the one health philosophy, that there is no distinction between animal health and human health. And it almost sounds like some Nazi, like back to nature shit, honestly. Like I could see it, you could easily twist it, I think, without going too far in that direction, you know, and kind of like there's a little bit of a misanthropic vibe to maybe some of the way these scientists like to talk about pandemics, and it's like we're causing these problems, and like until we learn to stop having like savage wet markets and cutting down rainforests and stuff, it's like inevitable that we're just going to come into contact with exotic zoonotic viruses that are going to devastate us. And like it almost like, you know, maybe on the radical fringe of people that kind of believe that type of environmental stuff, almost sometimes you can get detect that kind of thing of like we deserve this for being the dirty little greedy pigs that we are, like eating meat and building cities and all this other stuff, which of course there's like all kinds of critiques you can make of, and like, you know, environmental destruction.
Do we deserve it? That's a complicated question, but yeah, I mean, I don't know, like the basic idea that like, yeah, the way that you treat the environment like has consequences, like that I think ultimately is something that's true. But at the same time, for instance, like what you described, like assuming that their real plan was to like, you know, have all these like bats out in caves and like to do this dangerous research, like that is kind of meddling with nature. Like I get it that like instead of like, you know, stopping the actual like interaction or like the human beings pushing into like environments where there's a lot of like coronavirus infected bats or something, you know, opening that conversation. Instead, it's like, let's get a bunch of money from DARPA about how to create like a super lethal virus so that then we can like, you know, figure out how to vaccinate. It seems like kind of like putting the cart before the horse a little bit, or like a very roundabout solution. Like, I don't think that Bill Gates, like as we talked about in the past, like he talks about it. He like invests in all the things that are going to profit from the disasters that are going to ensue. But is he actually doing anything about it? Like, doesn't seem like it, you know? Like, that's, like, why don't you address why don't you go to the roots
he's doing
the
something.
branches, you know?
He's doing
like,
something, but is he doing something to sincerely address that problem? Or is he, aggrandizing his own power and influence and kind of profiting off of these crises. And to an extent, like, I mean, is that his whole kind of approach to like the art of philanthropy? Because I think he's given, these people have gotten Bill Gates money. And if you look on the Science and Policy Advisor Board of EcoHealth Alliance, one person you find is Dr. Scott Dowell, who is the Deputy Director for Surveillance and Epidemiology at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. There might be a couple other Bill and Melinda Gates people in the EcoHealth kind of group. I think that guy also hilariously co-signed the conspiracy letter in the Lancet, I noticed. Mm-hmm. But Dr. David Franz is on there as well. And there's also people from the Rockefeller Foundation. There's people that handled like the emerging, they were like the director of the Emerging Threats Program at USAID. Yeah, Dr. Ariel Pablos Mendez, or he was the former assistant administrator for global health at USAID. And then there's just multiple like spooky people. The chair of the board for EcoHealth is Dennis Carroll, who is the director of USAID's Pandemic Influenza and Emerging Threats Unit. And all the other people have ties to the Scowcroft Institute of International Affairs at the Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M. You know, Brent Scowcroft, that old Bush lackey, you know, back in the day, who was involved in dismantling the Soviet Union in the 1980s. And actually not the only person, because then it goes a little further, because I think this environmentalist thing is interesting. Their obsession, a lot of these people, to the extent that they talk about anything else, they kind of put the blame on humanity's collective degradation of the natural environment. And, you know, I think in his view, if you really believe the One Health philosophy, then we're doing harm to ourselves by harming nature, which, you know, is true in a certain way. But when you look at what these guys are going out and doing. But anyways, the thing that I found an interesting thing that Sam Husseini highlighted, it was like a Zoom conversation from 2020 that was hosted by the Columbia Earth Institute. Doesn't that name just make you feel optimistic? And that, I think, one of the principal people running that is Jeffrey Sachs. Now, I've always seen him as like a slippery fucking individual, because nowadays he's like a Bernie Sanders supporter. He's always talking about like stopping climate change and like how we need to think about ourselves. Is like he probably says some bullshit about like we're spaceship Earth or something. And he's generally regarded as like a pretty like respectable academic and somebody who's like kind of on like the humanistic left. But what never gets talked about, and it's like buried deep in his Wikipedia profile, is he was like the neoliberal wonk Harvard professor that was brought over to Eastern Europe in the late 80s and early 90s to literally like advise everybody on privatizing their economies, which like they did, and resulted in absolute like economic catastrophe. And he's, I think somebody referred to him as, quote, a cold-hearted neoliberal.
What does it have to do? What is his field?
Well, he is an economist. He's an economist, but he's kind of blown it up to more like he's a systems economist. He's a holistic economist.
Yeah,
you know, real wealth is like respecting Mother Earth also, but it's still making profits.
Economics is economos, you know, the law of the world, right? So
it's a bourgeois pseudoscience, but yes, I guess so. The laws that we tell ourselves in order to live. And he is hosting this talk, and very hilariously and kind of off-brand for Jeff Sachs is he has Peter Daszak on to talk about COVID, like early on when it's happening. And he says some interesting, like, things that could be self-incriminating if you're inclined to read it that way. But the weirdest thing is he starts out with a bunch of quotes, one of which is from Donald Rumsfeld. And he quotes like the famous known unknown which he called Rumsfeld's prescient speech, when in fact it was merely a press conference. But he quotes that at length and then talks about how like Donald Rumsfeld was like a visionary, and that he sees his own work kind of in a similar way. He emphasized the parallels between his own crusade and Rumsfeld, since according to Daszak, the quote potential for unknown attacks is the same for viruses. Daszak then proceeded with a not terribly subtle pitch for over $1 billion. This money would support a fledgling virus hunting and surveillance project of his, the Global Virome Project, a, quote, doable project, he assured watchers, given the cost of the pandemic to governments and various industries. And, I think I might have mixed that up. I was looking at the board connections of the Global Virome Project, of which he's the director. That chair is the director of USAID's Pandemic, Influenza, and Emerging Threats Unit, and also has Dr. Jennifer Grady, the deputy director of surveillance data and epidemiology at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation's malaria team, and a former assistant administrator at USAID, and the Scowcroft guy. So there's actually, I think, 2 separate people that are in the surveillance and epidemiology wing of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that are working on the boards of Daszak organizations. So it's like you start to get interlocks going on here, right? Like all these people are interconnected, and like Global Virome Project, isn't that great? Like what could go wrong with that? You know, he just wants to collect every single virus in the world so that anybody can work on it, and just wants $1 billion to set it up. It's no big deal. But yeah, so in that talk, he says a kind of like Jeff Sachs is even like, I'll agree to disagree with you on quoting Donald Rumsfeld, but then again, like I feel like somebody like Jeff Sachs is kind of emblematic of a kind of academic intellectual elite who's like kind of on the liberal left and somehow has acquired this like good reputation in these bona fides when like really he made his bones off like gutting the Soviet economy and privatizing it for like Western banks and oil companies and like destroying the social safety net and like shutting down every quote unquote unproductive factory in Poland. He was actually invited by Solidarność initially. That was his first project, to advise the brave CIA-backed, dissenters in the People's Republic of Poland in their transition to a market economy, which of course he advised. I think he advised them, he advised Gorbachev and then Yeltsin, and just advised like maximum privatization of absolutely everything and like helped them wriggle out of their IMF debt by basically selling off all their infrastructure and public utilities and everything else. So it's like that guy's got that hanging on his conscience, but nobody seems to mind, even though like by even mainstream accounts it failed miserably and caused like total economic chaos. I mean, if you want to blame the rise of Putin on anybody, maybe you should blame liberals. If any are listening right now, maybe they're not. Maybe you should blame Jeffrey Sachs for that. But now he's on a very high ivory tower perch at Columbia University, which has this Earth Institute, which sounds very Esalen, right? And they do all kinds of stuff in regards to like public health, economics, like this kind of shit that like Bill Gates seems to be interested in. And so they were just yucking it up and having a great time together. And Peter Daszak was shit talking all the conspiracy theorists. The other one, going back for a second to David Franz, because I watched his lecture from 2016, and he's still like he runs a consultancy company that I forget what it's called. It's like SPD Global in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. So he's a true patriot. But in this lecture from 2016, there were some interesting things that he mentioned that would seem to be contradictory or maybe like self-incriminating in this lecture about dual-use gain-of-function challenges. So
I read his essay or his longer paper about dual-use stuff.
He did publish a paper
basically,
about that.
That's just basically like the idea of like scientific research that could be used both like in a medical like way to help people and also like a military like weaponized way. Yeah,
exactly. So that's what dual use is. Yeah, something that could be made for totally benign purposes, but also the same exact thing you create could be weaponized into a bioweapon. Mm-hmm. So they're supposed to have that's what that C3PO or whatever the fuck it was called, that guidance after they put a pause on the funding was supposed to address. But so he's talking
like potential pandemic preparedness or something.
Yeah, P3CO, I think it was. Yeah. So so keep in mind this lecture, which I think was maybe for one of his classes at George Mason University. This is during the moratorium, before Trump gets in, but he talks about a few different things and like the controversies in the early 2010s around this type of research. And you definitely get the vibe like, because he mentions multiple times throughout that, like you said, he's of the mind, as are many of his colleagues, that these regulations are onerous and ridiculous and they're shitty, and he would love to see them go away.
We used to call it dual use, we used to just call it biology.
Research is research. He's a real scientific purist, just research is research, and like, thou shalt not impede the progress of research. And if you do, you're anti-science, sound familiar?
Yeah. This is actually, he's on board I actually have his paper right here. This is pretty interesting. This is like, he first says like Dirk has always existed, dual use research. He talks about how it's always existed, but we just called it different things. He says, in the past, when surprises occurred in biology or any of the sciences, responsible scientists typically acted responsibly, neither trying to gain undue attention for themselves nor seeking to misuse the new information. There have been and always will be irresponsible and even criminal minds in all professions and societies, but the vast majority of humans involved in the life sciences will continue to contribute positively for the good of mankind. And then he asks, what has changed in the U.S. and the world? Dartmouth professor Kendall Hoyt, Ph.D., in her book Long Shot, asks the questions. Why was the U.S. government so successful in developing and fielding vaccines from the 1940s to the 1950s, and why has it been so difficult in recent years? It cannot be the technologies, which have been greatly improved during the period in which progress in fielding has slowed. One would expect us to be better and faster today than 50 years ago. It turns out there may be several factors that explain the earlier successes and difficulties today. For example, simpler technologies and less complex approval protocols. However, Dr. Hoyt made two important conclusions, which suggest more behavioral than technical explanations. First, she learned that champion-led research, in which a single dedicated individual shepherds a vaccine candidate from the bench all the way through development, clinical trials, and licensure, was much more common. Second, Dr. Hoyt learned that these champions were working within collaborative communities. In these communities, scientists worked in teams and openly shared helpful information within and between those teams, even if this information might help make competitors successful. Sounds kind of like the Wuhan Virology Lab. Anyway, likely major contributor to the, competitors like the U.S. and China, champions like Xi Zhongli, the Bat Lady. A likely major contributor to both the motivation and the champions and the formation of communities was the patriotism and sense of urgency of a nation at war during World War II. And then he has in parentheses WW2. All right, thank you. Many of the scientists who had served their country in military laboratories, such as the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, then moved to commercial enterprise. The motivation and cultural norm in the workplace that was learned under excellent leadership in a time of great national struggle likely contributed to the burst of commercial productivity after the war. It is my belief that leadership and communities of trust not only lead to more productivity, but also reduce the potential impact of Dirk and even the threat of insider misconduct or criminality. And when he talks about that, like the whole Anthrax thing is obviously looming over this because
he mentions that in his speech a little bit. He can't really escape it. I mean, he says he knew the main guy who ended up killing himself, the scientist. He worked for him.
Yeah, Dr. Evans.
Bruce Evans or Evans. And then I think it was like Assad was an Arab scientist at Fort Detrick who actually was brought under investigation in 2001 when the anthrax attacks happened. There's a great series on, if anyone wants to read more specifically about this, on organicconsumers.org called The Gain of Function Hall of Shame that has like 7 or 8 individuals, most of whom we've name-checked already. But it does have a separate one, David R. Franz, EcoHealth Alliance's anthrax-era biological weapons scientist. And it goes into like kind of a very interesting story. We'd have to do a whole separate episode about the anthrax scare and the susness of that and how convenient it was and everything, and what a boon it was for the biotechnology industry and all these researchers and stuff. David Franz. Okay, so I'll just read a little bit from here. In this installment of the Gain of Function Hall of Shame, we had fellow Anthrax alumnus David R. Franz, now an advisor to EcoHealth Alliance, the coronavirus hunting funder of the Wuhan Institute of Virology, that we covered in our profile, Peter Daszak. Franz is a retired Army colonel who served at U.S. AMRID beginning in 1987. He was chief of the Cardiorespiratory Toxicology Department, chief of the Toxicology Division, deputy commander, and commander from 1995 to 1998. His years as commander overlap with those of the covert biological weapons programs described in Judith Miller's book Germs, Biological Weapons in America's Secret War, and he was a source for much of the information about them in the book. These included Projects Jefferson, the genetic engineering of vaccine-resistant anthrax, something the U.S. military had been doing since the 80s, Clear Vision, the production of bio-bomblets that could be used to disperse anthrax, and Bite Size and Bacchus, or BACUS, Biotechnology Activity Characterization by Unconventional Signatures, the production of anthrax simulant outside the lab as a terrorist cell might. In 1998, Franz left U.S. AMRID to work at the Southern Research Institute, a Pentagon biodefense contractor. SRI was one of the labs that, like U.S. AMRID, could have been a source of the virulent Ames anthrax used in the 2001 attacks. We know this because in 2004, it accidentally sent live spores of this strain to a children's hospital in Oakland. This made news, and an SRI spokesperson was quoted as saying they had been working with the pathogen since 2001. David Franz was understood to be within the circle of potential suspects, but he was never fingered in the FBI's investigation. To this day, no one knows who did it. There were 3 people variously blamed for the attack, but none of them were ever charged with a crime, let alone brought to trial. Ayad Assad, Stephen Hatfill, and Bruce Ivins each worked under Franz at U.S. AMRID. So this section, the Arab Patsy. Whoever orchestrated the anthrax attacks wanted them blamed on Islamic terrorists. Each of the anthrax-filled letters read, "Death to America, death to Israel, Allah is great." After 9/11, but before the anthrax attacks had been discovered, I know, right? The FBI received a letter warning that a former U.S. AMRID scientist, the Egyptian-born Ayad Assad, was planning a biological attack. Laura Rosen reported in Salon, quote, "Dr. Assad is a potential biological terrorist," the letter stated, according to Assad and his lawyer McDermott. The letter was received by the FBI in Quantico, Virginia, but Assad did not learn from the FBI where it had been mailed from. Quote, "I have worked with Dr. Assad, and I heard him say he has a vendetta against the U.S. government and that if anything happens to him, he told his sons to carry on." According to Assad, just like don't go to the mall on Halloween and don't go to the World Trade Center on 9/11. Yeah, my friend's Muslim boyfriend said. According to Assad, quote, "The letter writer clearly knew my entire background, my training in both chemical and biological agents, my security clearance, what floor where I work now, that I have 2 sons, what train I take to work, and where I live. The letter warned the FBI to stop me," he said. At the time, Assad was involved in a lawsuit against U.S. AMRID, claiming that he had gone to his supervisor, David Franz, asking him to stop his co-workers, Charles Brown, Marion Rippey, and Philip Zach, who had formed a camel club to harass Assad with racially charged and sexually explicit poems and objects. He charged that Franz had, quote, "kicked me out of his office and slammed the door in my face, and later fired him in retaliation for his complaints." The FBI quickly cleared Assad of any connection to the anthrax attacks. The FBI never tried to trace the source of the accusatory letter, even though it may have been one of the best leads on whodunit. As the Hartford Courant reported, Assad said he believes the note's timing makes the author a suspect in the anthrax attacks, and he is convinced that details of his work contained in the letter mean the author must be a former Fort Detrick colleague. Brown said that he doesn't know who sent the letter, but that Assad's nationality and expertise in biological agents made him an obvious subject of concern after September 11th. Don Foster, an expert on language forensics assisting the FBI, searched through documents by some 40 U.S. AMRID employees and found writings by a female officer that looked like a perfect match. Foster doesn't name names, so we don't know who the female officer was. As Assad's Wikipedia page puts it, quote, "he did not name Marion Rippey directly." Okay, maybe it was Marion Rippey. One thing we do know is that racial harassment wasn't the only thing David Franz let Rippey and Zach get away with under his watch. During the same time that their Camel Club was active, an internal investigation revealed that 27 sets of specimens were reported missing at Fort Detrick and that secret research was being done in a lab outside of work hours. Dr. Mary Beth Downs told investigators that she had come to work several times in January and February 1992 to find that someone had been in the lab at odd hours, clumsily using the sophisticated electron microscope to conduct some kind of off-the-books research. After one weekend in February, Downs discovered that someone had been in the lab using the microscope to take photos of slides, and had apparently forgotten to reset a feature in the microscope that imprints each photo with a label. After taking a few pictures of her own slides that morning, Downs was surprised to see Anthrax 005 emblazoned on her negatives. Downs also noted that an automatic counter on the camera, like an odometer on a car, had been rolled back to hide the fact that pictures had been taken over the weekend. She wrote of her findings in a memo to Langford, noting that whoever was using the microscope was either in a big hurry or didn't know what they were doing. Documents from the inquiry show that one unauthorized person who was observed entering the lab building that night was Lieutenant Colonel Philip Daszak, who at the time no longer worked at Fort Detrick. A surveillance camera recorded Daszak being let in at 8:40 p.m. on January 23, 1992, apparently by Dr. Marion Rippey, a lab pathologist and close friend of Daszak's, according to a report filed by a security guard. Of course, there were other female scientists at AMRID who Don Foster may have been referring to. One is Patricia Fellows, a scientist who provided evidence that placed Bruce Ivans at the scene of the crime, and who worked on anthrax with David Franz at the Southern Research Institute. And, it goes on to talk about Stephen Hatfill and the lawsuits he had to deal with. I remember reading about that years ago. It says Hatfill worked at U.S. AMRID from 97 and 99, overlapping with the years Franz was in command. In the years immediately preceding the anthrax attacks, Hatfill and Franz were each working on government anthrax projects with private contractors. As the Baltimore Sun reported, Dr. Stephen J. Hatfill, the former Fort Detrick biodefense researcher, commissioned a 1999 study that described a fictional terrorist attack in which an envelope containing weapons-grade anthrax is opened in an office. The study written by a veteran, Dark Winter all over again, the study written by a veteran of the old U.S. bioweapons program was submitted to Hatfill and a colleague at Science Applications International Corp., or SAIC, the McLean, Virginia defense contractor where he then worked. It discusses the danger of anthrax spores spreading through the air and the requirements for decontamination after various kinds of attacks. The author, William C. Patrick III, describes placing 2.5 grams of Baseless globigi, an anthrax simulant, in a standard business envelope, slightly more than the estimated amount of anthrax in each of the letters that killed 5 people last fall. During the same period, Franz was at the Southern Research Institute, also SRI, which was working on an anthrax project for Pentagon's Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, DARPA. SRI has received $640.3 million in government funding since 2001. In 1999 and 2001, DARPA contracted with SRI and other firms for microencapsulated anthrax. In their 2012 article in the peer-reviewed Journal of Bioterrorism and Biodefense, Evidence for the Source of the 2001 Attack Anthrax, Martin E. Hugh Jones, Barbara Hatch Rosenberg, and Stuart Jacobson linked the forensic evidence from the attack anthrax to the microencapsulation techniques developed by the DARPA contractors, i.e. Franz. The significance was that microencapsulation would explain the silicon in the attack anthrax. Furthermore, there were no spores containing silicon in the anthrax handled by Bruce Ivans. Eventually, the facts established that the attack anthrax was microencapsulated with a silicon coating, but in the fall of 2002, the FBI reported to Congress that there was, quote, no additive in the Senate anthrax at all. The Bureau based this on the word of Ken Allebeck, who said he examined electron micrographs of the anthrax spores sent to Senator Daschle and saw no silica. Was he blinded by fear of self-incrimination? By the way, Allebeck is a Russian bioweapon scientist recruited to work for the U.S. That's also something that Franz was intimately involved in. He's boasted about it. He was in charge of bringing over all the top Soviet bio-warfare scientists when Jeffrey Sachs was gutting their economy. All these guys were just stripping the USSR for parts, including their scientists. And so David Franz ended up working with Allebeck on that DARPA contract for anthrax in 1999 to 2001 with another former U.S. AMRID commander, Charles L. Bailey. Their firm, Advanced Biosystems, was the prime contractor for the DARPA project. Oh, I see. So they were in one thing called Advanced Biosystems, and then Franz's SRI was a subcontractor. And then Bruce Ivans died of a Tylenol overdose in 2008, and the FBI announced their conclusion he was solely responsible for the 2001 anthrax attacks. Well, I mean, so this guy's still on an advisory board for the Pentagon to this day, in addition to being, in private practice and an advisor to EcoHealth and all that stuff. So, quite a resume there. And you see, like, in talking about lab leaks, like, just that circumstantial evidence alone, you had these racist employees who potentially framed an Arab scientist who they didn't like, and in the meantime, like, maybe stole some anthrax, which they had proof of people doing it before in the earlier 90s.
Yeah,
it's just interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, in terms of what I was just reading before from like his essay on Dirk that he wrote. When exactly did he write this? I guess this was...
It was like maybe 2015 or something, 2016.
Yeah, this is giving his bio. It's the St. University School of Law. I guess he... he's citing things from 2013, so yeah, I guess it was around then. But yeah, just after what I had read before, he went on to like complain basically about how like the authority is distributed. Like he basically says that like, beginning just before 9/11 and spreading to other government security laboratories, the authority to make decisions locally has been pulled to within the Beltway, while responsibility has stayed with the laboratories. So he's complaining like relatively experienced inexperienced managers are now often assigned to manage research product portfolios within the laboratories from afar. And he wants like laboratory directors and commanders to be in charge, So he says they knew their programs, they were dedicated to their missions, and they loved their people. So basically there's too much oversight. Today, good people hold some of those positions within leadership experience from other military sectors, but lack technical credibility. In other cases, qualified leaders are given responsibility, but adequate authority to do their jobs is withheld. Yeah, this is kind of what you were saying about how, like, we can't just regulate it away, He says, like the rest of the sciences, technical advances in biology are incremental but cumulative and generally not reversible. One cannot put the toothpaste of the global life sciences enterprise back in the tube. Like physical and chemical phenomena in nature, biological ones challenge us as a human race and exact a toll on health and life. More than 9,050,000+ people who die globally each year die of infectious diseases. Plant losses from pests and pathogens alone are believed to result in monetary losses of approximately 20 to 33 billion annually in the U.S. So the challenges of disease are not only related directly to humans. And then he says something very odd, which is, our experience with intentional disease, biological warfare, terrorism, and crime is much more limited than our experience with naturally occurring disease. Historians believe that at least 10,000 to 12,000 Chinese died from biological warfare attacks by the Japanese during World War II. I mean, that is true and terrible. But then he just goes and says, we know that 5 humans died as a result of the anthrax letters sent through the U.S. mail system in 2001.
We do, I bet you do know.
Yeah, but it's weird that, like, those are the only 2 examples that he used. Like, there's definitely worse, like, more egregious uses of bioweapons by the United States. But I guess...
like Korean War, germ warfare, like Agent Orange in Vietnam, like depleted uranium, if you want to go there.
Does Agent Orange count as a biological weapon because it's not like a virus,
It's true. It's just a toxic chemical. It's a carcinogenic chemical.
I don't know.
Yeah, it was a defoliant technically, but it did give everybody cancer and kill them.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it is a biological toxin, or I guess there's like a toxin that has like a technical definition, which is like not the same as a poison. Toxin has to be produced within living cells or organisms. So toxicants are not the same. But anyway.
That's true.
So the relative emphasis the government places on these health threats vary with the perception of them. The perception held by politicians and news media are particularly powerful. Very true. But yeah, then he kind of retells the whole story of, I don't think that he mentioned Ahmad Assad.
No, he didn't mention, in his 2016 lecture, he mentioned the anthrax stuff and talked about Bruce Ivins. He did not mention Ayad Assad at all, but he actually did curiously say, like, and I still don't know if he did it. I don't know. I mean, he said the circumstantial evidence is overwhelming, but I can't say for sure. There are people that worked with him, and I knew him as well as anybody that think he didn't do it, and then he kind of moved on.
Yeah, he kind of did say that Ivins didn't do it. Well, first he talks about Hatfill, right? And he says, Dr. Hatfill filed a lawsuit against the New York Times and Nicholas D. Kristof, a New York Times reporter, for statements Kristof published suggesting that Hatfill was the likely culprit. The case was dismissed on summary judgment on January 12, 2007, based on the fact that Dr. Hatfield was a public figure. Dr. Hatfield also filed a lawsuit against Donald Foster, a forensic linguist who stated in a 2003 Reader's Digest article that Hatfield's travels and the postmarks in certain anthrax hoax letters closely correlated. The suit was apparently settled at a court. So he is kind of seeming to implicate this guy, but then he's like, the FBI began to focus its attention on Dr. Ivins, an anthrax vaccine specialist. As the questioning and surveillance of Dr. Ivins' family and himself continued, the pressure on the FBI to solve the nearly 7-year-old case intensified. During this time, we learned much more about the life of the hardworking and selfless but quirky scientist so many of us knew. Wow, on the morning of August 2nd, 2008, the Frederick News Post opened with the headline, "Anthrax Case Turns. Dr. Ivins had committed suicide." So it does seem like he kind of has like a warmth, like he's called like the hardworking and selfless but quirky scientist so many of us knew. You mean the anthrax like attacker? Like what?
Very, very strange. Yeah, I mean, he kind of, and he doesn't.
Chill,
what about Philip Zach? What about Philip Zach? Who, I mean, if we're gonna believe that article, that they, let me see. Yeah, Dr. Mary Beth Downs said when she found that Anthrax 005 thing on her microscope. And then they looked, the documents from the inquiry show that one unauthorized person went to the lab that night, and it was Lieutenant Colonel Philip Zach, one of the members of the Camel Club, and he was let in at 8:40 p.m. by Dr. Marion Rippey, who that same guy, Don Foster, the forensic dude, said that the language of the letter blaming Assad, they're always blaming Assad, basically closely matched her. Well, they said a female scientist, but this article is kind of insinuating that it probably was Marion Rippey, who was also a member of the Camel Club, you know, so they're a bunch of racists that hated this Arab scientist. And that was in 1992. So that would have been 9 years before the anthrax attacks, but like that seems pretty damning. So it's weird to like both the FBI and David Franz have nothing to say about these two sus lords. That
in this paper he goes on basically to say that like the regulation, like, you know, to try to limit like things like the anthrax attack from happening again, like, you know, is just so like, you know, it's so wrong to like oppress. Basically he draws like a direct comparison between like Muslims after 9/11 and like the scientists who are being oppressed pretty much when like he kind of oversaw like an instance of like anti-Muslim bigotry. He like basically is saying like now they want to regulate us, and that's just like when in New York City the police, you know, they harass innocent people just because of what some people did. Like it's not quite the same. Like you do work at like a high security laboratory, like dealing with like dangerous like biological agents. So you know, that is something that like you can regulate like a little bit more than like going to mosque. I would think. But,
he's mad the regulators are gonna like stop and frisk him to see if he has anthrax in his pockets.
His anthrax plan backfired. You know,
according to the UCLA Department of Epidemiology, I'm seeing here there's a video of Lieutenant Colonel Philip Zach, Dr. Philip Zach, entering Fort Detrick Laboratory containing the anthrax spores after he was fired for racist attacks on an Egyptian coworker. So even though that did say 1992, I feel like that was such a long area before. Yeah, I don't know, but this is on UCLA's website where they're talking about this. Dr. Ayad Assad and late night research. Yeah, surreptitious work being done in the pathology lab late at night and on weekends. Dr. Mary Beth Down, I think they quoted straight from this article. Yeah, so he was like a former employee of Fort Detrick at that point who was let in. He shouldn't have been allowed in.
What the fuck?
Yeah, I mean, like, so when we talk about like lab leaks, like I definitely push back hard on the idea that like no nefarious individual could gain access to this lab and get a specimen of it and then take it out and do something with it, because there's like examples of this happening. Friends actually says something very interesting where during his lecture where he talks about how, I think he says Bob Graham did a kind of a Senate investigation in the 2000s about the anthrax thing and biosecurity and, you know, government labs and stuff. And Bob Graham said something along the lines of, we are way too worried about terrorists becoming biologists and not nearly worried enough about biologists becoming terrorists.
Yeah.
Which I think is there's kind of something true to that. It's like it's way easier. It's way more likely that a biologist is going to become a terrorist than the other way around. Then Al Qaeda is going to like learn how to create like Anthrax or something like that. Which apparently that's where most of the money was going in the 2000s. Funding like how do we stop like a terrorist cell from like cooking up a batch of anthrax when in fact like the one anthrax attack was from somebody stealing it from a government lab who would have been a scientist, right? So it's very it's all very sus. But just a few other things that David Franz like mentions in his lecture that relate to COVID, which are interesting because his resume seems to contradict a few of the things he says, even though he's very pro gain of function in this lecture. He describes a few different experiments that came about in the early 2010s. So one he talks about, I think it was in maybe 2013. He describes a paper where scientists took the H5N1, it was the bird flu virus, right? That had just recently gone around.
Wasn't H1N1 swine flu? Am I right?
Maybe no. I think it was a bird flu because they
No, H1N1 was swine flu.
Oh, what?
I just looked it up.
It was H5N1 swine flu. Let me see. No, that is bird flu. H5N1 is the bird flu. Yeah, avian influenza. So I guess what a group of scientists did was they did a study where they edited, basically did gain of function research on H5N1 to make it easier to infect mammals, in particular ferrets. And it came to, I guess, the advisory board on the Pentagon that David Franz was sitting on. And there was, I guess, he said it caused great controversy in the scientific community, whether or not they should allow this to be published, with basically all the sequencing and like kind of, I think what people have described Daszak's work as like an anarchist cookbook of like how to cook up a chimera virus or something. And so some people said this could be dangerous. And he explains, yeah, maybe. But then he advised to publish it because he said, you got to publish the research. You just got to publish it. You just got to publish it. Science is good all the time. So he thought it was because he said something funny. It was like, I at the end of the day, I believe you just got to publish the research and you got to put it out there because I believe at the end of the day, there are more good scientists out there than
he said
bad
the same
scientists.
thing. Like the vast majority of scientists like are good. I mean, that
Yeah,
may
but
be
you don't
true,
need that.
but,
I'm sure that's true, but like you don't need that many bad ones to do something really awful.
Especially
I mean?
like, I don't know. I just feel like the bad ones are often. Yeah, exactly. You don't need that many bad ones to do something bad.
What if you can't detect the bad ones because they're
getting,
running
like,
the
DARPA
whole
funding because
yeah?
DARPA's bad. I guess
what if they're the leading lights of the industry?
If you don't recognize DARPA as being bad, then like that's a flawed like axiology, and you can't like really make a rational decision about like how many good scientists there are because like if you're like it's awesome to develop a bioweapon.
Exactly. And so then he says something he cites a really interesting study from April 2014, the University of Maryland, and what they did is they were experimenting with H7N9, which I guess was like a later version of I think the bird flu, and what they did in that study was they put it in ferrets once again. I think they're like pretty similar to humans, so that's why they do it. And they passed it. They did passages of basically ferrets infecting each other, like back and forth, just ferret to ferret. That's all they did. And after doing a gain of function on this H7N9, and what they found is after 10 passages back and forth, it became transmissible to humans. And so he jumped out at that. He said, well, this is interesting because you don't need a lab. All you need is a cave to do this study. And I thought that was pretty scary.
So, right. That became like a big controversy, right?
Yeah.
Like that, yeah.
And so that was actually the same year that, and I think 2014 was also when Ebola blew up in Liberia and was like this huge thing. And that's when the Obama administration decided to put a 3-year pause on gain of function research in U.S. labs. It's also interesting that like that's around the same time that all of this EcoHealth funding shifted to the Wuhan lab, because it's like it was under stringent regulations in the U.S., so they had to go somewhere that was willing to play a little more fast and loose with virology. And who knows why the Chinese were as interested as they were in partnering with DARPA or like allowing DARPA to like fund their whole lab. But I don't know. But nonetheless, I mean, the fact that he said this study really scared me because all you need is a cave to do it. And if it only took 10 cycles of transmission with ferrets for it to evolve into becoming a human, transmissible to humans. So it's like, if that's what you believe about that study, unless David Franz knew absolutely nothing about this like proposal to DARPA in 2018. Like, wouldn't you jump on that since you're Mr. Science Advisor to EcoHealth? Like, wouldn't you say literally going into a cave to do this study is pretty scary and you shouldn't do it? So why is he? But then he says right after that, well, but you gotta
put the research out there.
He said, are we simply going to regulate this away? He's just like, come on, what's the big deal? And then later he does mention. Like I said earlier, he name drops Ralph Barrick, who is the author of the no-seum virus editing technique, and said, we really need to do gain-of-function work on MERS. And I think Ralph has been shut down by these new, evil regulations.
Ralph.
Then he brings up CRISPR, which I think had just been kind of started to roll out, around 2016. I remember all those articles about it. And then he brings up a slide of the movie Gattaca and is like, that's awesome. Literally what CRISPR is. Like, it's
awesome. Yeah.
A future where you're going to be able to edit for specific genes and make people more beautiful and more intelligent and blah, blah, blah. It's like, Hollywood, they just had it 20 years before we did. But he's just kind of mentions like, yeah, that's where we're going with CRISPR. And, no value judgment. It's dual use. You can do whatever with it. But definitely just his mentioning of a couple of those studies is like, it's very odd. Then he doesn't seem like a dumb person, and why would he be sitting around I think we know why, because he's in this game. It's like a mafia a little bit. I think at this high level of people that are doing like biodefense contracting work, it must be kind of this insular club where people, you don't talk shit about other people like in the club, and you don't rock the gravy train. You don't try to derail the gravy train, right? And
what you mentioned about CRISPR reminded me of this other thing. Again, that I read in Vanity Fair that mentioned CRISPR in particular. It was talking about, the sort of early days of the pandemic and how back then, it didn't seem so crazy to think, maybe it came out of a lab. And they write that apparently it didn't seem crazy to Shi Zhongli either. A Scientific American article, first published in March 2020, for which she was interviewed, described how her lab had been the first to sequence the virus in those terrible first weeks. It also recounted how she frantically went through her own lab's records from the past few years to check for any mishandling of experimental materials, especially during disposal. She breathed a sigh of relief when the results came back. None of the sequences matched those of the viruses her team had sampled from bat caves. That really took a load off my mind, she says. I had not slept a wink for days.
What a relief.
As the NSC tracked, it's interesting that she hadn't slept, anyway, but I don't know.
Like, she's freaking out. She's absolutely freaking out that, like, this happened, and then is like, oh, like, actually, no. Like, Peter Daszak, like, deleted COVID from the servers, and, like, oh, I guess it's not there.
But this is the relevant part. As the NSC tracked these disparate clues, U.S. government virologists advising them flagged one study first submitted in April 2020. 11 of its 23 co-authors work for the Academy of Military Medical Sciences, the Chinese Army's medical research institute. Using the gene editing technology known as CRISPR, the researchers had engineered mice with humanized lungs, then studied their susceptibility to SARS-CoV-2. As the NSC officials worked backwards from the date of publication to establish a timeline for the study, it became clear that the mice had been engineered sometime in the summer of 2019, before the pandemic even started. The NSC officials were left wondering, had the Chinese military been running viruses through humanized mouse models to see which might be infectious to humans? Believing they had uncovered important evidence in favor of the lab leak hypothesis, the NSC investigators began reaching out to other agencies. That's when the hammer came down. We were dismissed, said Anthony Ruggiero, the NSC Senior Director for Counterproliferation and Biodefense. The response was very negative.
Wow. Well, I mean, the 2018 DARPA proposal from EcoHealth, like, definitely mentions, like, using humanized mice for experiments to test,
Yeah.
like gain-of-function COVID viruses.
At the WIV, like basically civilian scientists and like military people will be working side by side.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if like there were like U.S. military people there.
I don't believe so, because one of the things highlighted in their proposal was they proposed that EcoHealth manage all DARPA like contracts and projects in China. That like basically we will just handle everything.
Oh yeah, well like David Franz says, you got to have qualified leaders, and it has to be champion driven.
Yes, that'd be champion driven. You have to be a
heroes.
real, And I mean, I don't even know what Peter Daszak's like. There's no information about his early life before
That's like
he
more
went to
fash
college.
to me than any of like the environmental stuff that they like all want to be like fucking. Like they all have like these weird like Hercules complexes.
These like mad scientist like vibes that we're kind of getting
true.
from them.
They do
like,
have mad scientist
like
vibes.
extreme arrogance, like Peter Daszak. And also, I watched a few of his interviews because now he's. This is what's the kind of the sickest thing, the weirdest thing, is that Peter Daszak has made himself into like a very public spokesman about like whatever the mainstream consensus on COVID is. Like he's been on CNN multiple times. Like you said, he was on the WHO investigative team that did, and then went on CNN to basically, and I think 60 Minutes. He went back there a couple times to basically. Describe why his great ferret badger theory, which is funny because like David Franz's like lecture just mentions all these experiments with ferrets. So even that is a little bit like, but if you just watch him, he does have like I can sense his vibe shifted like from the things he was like 5-10 years ago and like his modern press appearances, depending on particularly the one where he was being grilled by 60 Minutes. I don't know, just like his eyes are kind of like darting back and forth like really quickly, and he just seems totally like, no, here's what I can tell you, like why the lab leak is not convincing, and all this stuff. He's super sketchy, like not even in like an SJ sus, like with just like a guy who's being deceptive, like he's covering up.
I mean, the
something.
fact that they were like, we need to organize this like letter to like denounce conspiracy theories, but then we can't put our names on it because like then it will seem like. I mean, come on! Like that's straight up deceptive. Like
it's like the CIA's creation of it to begin with. It's suspicious behavior, exactly. And I don't know, we just can't trust it.
There's more damning proof of coronavirus originating from the Wuhan virology lab in China. India Today's access now an explosive video of Peter Daszak, member of WHO International Expert Group. He's the president of the EcoHealth Alliance. And in this video, which dates back to a few years ago, Daszak boasts about the manipulation of a killer SARS-like coronavirus carried out by his colleagues in China.
So we sequenced the spike protein, the protein that attaches to cells. Then I didn't do this work, but my colleagues in China did the work.
An explosive video of Dr. Peter Daszak boasting about the manipulation of killer SARS-like coronavirus being carried out by colleagues, as he put it, in China. In this 2016 video, Dr. Daszak speaks at a forum on emerging infectious diseases and the next pandemic and describes in detail the research being carried out at the Wuhan lab in China.
Then when you get a sequence of a virus and it looks like a relative of a known nasty pathogen, just like we did with SARS, we found other coronaviruses in bats, a whole host of them. Some of them looked very similar to SARS. So we sequenced the spike protein, the protein that attaches to cells. Then I didn't do this work, but my colleagues in China did the work. You create pseudoparticles, you insert the spike proteins from those viruses, see if they bind to human cells. And each step of this, you move closer and closer to this virus could really become pathogenic in people.
This is also indicative of the growing proof of Wuhan Institute of Virology's deep financial and personal ties to US President Joe Biden's top advisor on health, Dr. Anthony Fauci's National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Peter Daszak heads EcoHealth Alliance, which is reported to have funneled funds to the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
And we went out to southern China and did surveillance of bats across southern China. And we've now found, after 6 or 7 years of doing this, over 100 new SARS-related coronaviruses, very close to SARS. Some of them get into human cells in the lab. Some of them can cause SARS disease in humanized mouse models and are treatable with therapeutic monoclonals, and you can't vaccinate against them with the vaccine.
Dr. Daszak's EcoHealth Alliance is in the eye of a storm for sending $600,000 to the Wuhan lab that is seen as the source of the coronavirus. Dr. Daszak is also reported to have organized a statement expressing solidarity with scientists and health professionals in China. The statement read, "We stand together to strongly condemn conspiracy theories suggesting that COVID-19 does not have natural origin," unquote. Dr. Daszak also thanked Anthony Fauci in April 2020 for downplaying the theory that the coronavirus may have leaked from a lab. But with more information filtering out, seeking closer scrutiny of the Wuhan lab, Dr. Fauci too has now called for more investigations.
I do not have any accounting of what the Chinese may have done, and I'm fully in favor of any further investigation of what went on in China. However, I will repeat again, the NIH and NIAID categorically has not funded gain-of-function research to be conducted in the Wuhan.
Just like we did with SARS, we found
Dr. Daszak's 2016 boast about the manipulation of the killer SARS-like virus carried out by his colleagues in China has once again brought the spotlight on the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Bureau Report, India Today.
I think maybe we'll start to wrap up, but I think the most appropriate way to end would be, I don't know if you've read it yet, but Peter Daszak's paper called "A Fall from Grace to Virulence."
Oh yeah, I did.
From 2008.
It was short as far
as
short? I could tell. Yeah,
but it's a window into the mind of this incredible scientist.
The picture is pretty interesting too. I don't know if you looked at the painting.
Let me look. He described such a beautiful description.
It's not
of it.
what you might expect. It's not like an expressionist type of thing. It's very like Boschian.
Oh wow!
Weird
yeah, I'm looking at
picture,
it right now.
Yeah.
"The Fall of the Rebel Angels" by Peter Bruegel the Elder from 1562, and it depicts Lucifer along with other fallen angels that have been banished from heaven, and I guess is that the Archangel Michael in the middle? Like fighting.
Yeah,
there's angels fighting.
Yeah, the hero.
And there's even some like strange chimeric animals floating around.
Some of the rebel angels or whatever they are very odd looking. They do kind of look like weird, like viral beings or something.
Yeah, this actually is. This is kind of like a Hieronymus Bosch painting. It's very bizarre. Very dark.
The rebel angels the humans mostly look, or the good angels mostly look normal, but some of the rebel angels are fucking horrifying.
Yeah, they look like little fishmen or a pig man. There's a belly splitting open with I don't know if that's intestines or eyeballs in it or something. This is really yikes.
No,
it's like a frog man being slit open what the fuck?
I'm pretty sure you could find a bat somewhere in here. Yeah,
there's definitely a bat. There's a girl with wings. It looks almost like a girl with she's a mermaid, but she has monarch butterfly wings.
No,
oh my god.
Yeah. I don't know if it's a monarch butterfly.
It looks like there's a pangolin falling from heaven.
No, yeah, I do see kind of the weird. Well, it looks.
It's weird. The more you look at it, the more fucking terrifying and bizarre it is. These are all alien creatures and demons and stuff.
Yeah, the one that's this weird circular fish with a screaming face. So it was very very central in the picture. It's
yeah, exactly. It looks like the little hat, the white hat in the right side looks like the Meat Baby, like wearing a mask.
Yeah, there's like a weird
Buffalo
like
J,
elk
Meat Baby.
fish thing like coming out of an egg. Of course, an egg which has
Of
like a
course, an
stinger on it. You know,
Oh my
it's
God.
very weird. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know.
There's, like,
This
an
is
evil
what
Jin wearing like a fucking spaceman hat, and he's like wearing like he's like and yeah, he looks like kind of the Meat Baby, and he's got like a little like cutlass, and yeah, it's weird.
he looks like he has a mask on, like he's wearing his surgical
Yeah, he's
mask
wearing like
a little
he looks
bit.
like he's wearing a spaceman helmet, and he has like a Ouija board planchette like for clothes, and that's it. Like and just like it's belted onto him.
It's so weird. So I guess, without
Yeah.
further ado,
Right.
for people, definitely Google it. It's fucking bizarre. But okay, so he wrote this article in 2008. You can find it on the NIH website, in the EcoHealth Journal, of which Peter Daszak is the editor-in-chief of, and some, I assume, Ukrainian person named Alexei Chimera. I was curious if Peter Daszak, he sounds Polish, but everyone, ain't nothing new. Mispronounces his name as like Daszak or Daszak or something like that. But he's British. He's very British. So I wonder if he's like the son of like some anti-communist, like Polish immigrant or something like that. Anyways, he wrote this paper, A Fall from Grace to Virulence, and I'll just read it. Okay.
Yeah.
Peter Daszak writes, in Bruegel's painting of the fall of the rebel angels, we are witness to a tumbling maelstrom of falling rebel angels outcast from heaven. Within the fray stands Saint Michael in gilded armor, and his angels at arms serenely in pale albs, and almost as if threshing grain, hewing and striking down this inconceivable rout. The main focus of the image and what draws the eye is the extraordinarily creative melange of creatures, mixtures of human, animal, plant, and inanimate objects slashing and stabbing as they fall from the great battlefields in the skies. They pour down in a vast column that stretches infinitely from the luminous sun. They fall from the light to the darkness. The column of falling angels is so numerous that it widens to encompass the whole lower canvas as it approaches the viewer. With a start, then, we realize that Bruegel intends that we too are in the thick of this. Will we succumb to the multitudinous horde? Are we to be cast downward into chthonic chaos represented here by the heaped-up gibbering phantasmagoria against which we rail and struggle? Clearly Bruegel intended for us to identify with St. Michael and his comrades. The classic imagery of religious battles between humanity and evil is straightforward fodder for us to digest. But is there another metaphor here? If the fallen angels represent the evil mirror image of St. Michael and his cohort, so they also represent the mirror image of our own genetic kind, pathogenic organisms which are otherwise just like us, but have fallen from grace through an evolutionary, not spiritual, pathway that takes them to a netherworld where they can feed only on our genes, our cells, our flesh. On closer scrutiny, we can see that Bruegel has depicted the natural world, specifically chosen it as proxy for the fallen angels, for both its fascinating wonder and horror. Thus may we surmise that nature was, in Bruegel's mind, itself as strange, wondrous, and horrific as the fallen angels that he depicted in the juxtaposed forms of otherwise anatomically correct fishes, bats, and frogs. Bruegel was an urban man, and precisely because of his lack of intimate knowledge of nature, he capitalizes nature, by the way,
Awesome.
he was likely able to observe it with such precision. No doubt he was influenced during time spent in France and Italy by that unique Renaissance creation, the scientific method, or means to learn about phenomena via empirical evidence. Today we are not unlike Bruegel as we view the wondrously diverse animals and plants that represent nature, where he ends things in question marks that aren't posed as questions. But anyways, today we are not unlike Bruegel as we view the wondrously diverse animals and plants that represent nature, peering beneath this palimpsest the pathogens that threaten to plague us. AIDS, SARS, malaria, West Nile virus, and avian influenza are but a few of these fallen angels that have burst from out of the natural world to wreak havoc, causing countless deaths and economic losses. In Bruegel's curious Chimeras, we find yet another analogy for the genetic recombination, mutation, and evolution that negative-stranded RNA viruses in particular undergo as they shift, morph, and adapt to their changing habitat, animal cells. Here St. Michael is at risk of more than just the prodding of a sword. Here he is at the mercy of the tooth and nail of glycoproteins, sharpened and honed to strike with precision through the gaps of his golden armor. As Pulliam shows in this issue of EcoHealth, this battle continues in reality as human encroachment. This battle continues in reality as human encroachment into wildlife habitat and the increasing globalization of agriculture, trade, and travel bring us into dramatic juxtaposition with a seemingly infinite number and variety of viral angels hosted by the wildlife we contact and exploit. In this prescient scene, Bruegel reminds us that our battle against novel zoonotic pathogens is far from over. They lie in wait in a multitude of surely the same overwhelming dimensions as Bruegel's column of descending angels. Perhaps he reminds us also that it is the nature of our interactions with wildlife, here represented as an evil entity for humanity to vanquish, which caused new zoonoses to emerge in the first place. Perhaps the EcoHealth view is that if we tread carefully, we might avoid those nasty little pincers waiting to nip.
Nice.
The end. So, I mean, I don't even know. I don't even know what the fuck. So the virus is a demon.
Yes. Yeah, and viruses are like our biological brethren that are fallen from grace by an evolutionary fall.
Not spiritual.
And, yeah, you kind of have to look at the picture to like kind of understand what he's getting at, because like the angels look like very naturalistic and like accurately represented. Actually, I'm reading now on Wikipedia that like this originally was thought to be a Hieronymus Bosch painting, but something that doesn't quite that is like an element that I wouldn't necessarily associate with Hieronymus Bosch, which is that the humans look really normal and the fallen angels, they're like all these bizarre. I mean, like, they are like very djinn-ly. It's an evocative depiction of like djinn, honestly, in a non-Islamic, context of this sort of. Maybe this could be interpreted as a picture of the djinn war rather than the war in heaven. But
true.
His reading of it is like kind of like they're like chimeras, basically.
They are. They're literally chimeras, and he's already back in 2008. He's very obsessed with these curious chimeras, and particularly, what did he say? Like
those little
negative stranded RNA viruses, and like particularly, he didn't mention coronaviruses, but like respiratory viruses. Also, it did make me think the first time that he mentioned like the mirror image of us, that it also like this represents like the war of the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated. What's more deplorable than these like djinn like writhing who are like they're just like us? But see, that's weird because like and again, maybe that's his One Health like brainwashing kicking in, but like we're not a virus. Like we're humans. We're animals. Yeah. We're different. We're not this. Well, I mean, is that chauvinistic? I don't know.
He's looking through. He's saying we are not unlike Bruegel as we view the wondrously diverse animals and plants that represent nature, peering beneath this palimpsest, the pathogens that threaten to plague us. So one of those questions are. He meant like are we not? But he wrote we are not. Yeah,
exactly.
So he's
and then he talks about
the fallen angel that is burst from the capital N natural world. Very weird, like capitalization of nature, like natural world. Like what is that all about? Like that's not
causing
normal.
Countless deaths and economic losses.
Why is he in a Gaia religion? What is he in a Gaia religion?
I feel like everyone at the Earth Institute is in the secret Gaia religion.
Well, but he has like a weird, like, I mean, definitely like having an appreciation for nature, like is natural, like I'm looking, just at this like framed picture that we have like of different leaves, like on our wall and things, like nature is very beautiful, but like one of the things that I wouldn't like necessarily admire AIDS, like I wouldn't like be like wow, like look at what nature has created, like this,
nature didn't create it, that's fine.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Name something that wasn't created by like Nazis and Fort Detrick. Yeah, sure. Like I wouldn't like Spanish flu. I wouldn't be like amazing, brave. Like you're just like me. I wanna understand you. Like I need to get over my virophobia too. Like like is that where we're gonna like? I don't know. It's like a very bizarre leveling, which kind of syncs up with this overall ideology that there like literally is no difference between human health, animal health, and like environmental health. Like they're all just equal. Like it feels like he takes it on a kind of reductive level. Like there's a nuanced way maybe of where that's like a good idea and everything is kind of a system, but it kind of it smacks of a little bit of like messianic oversimplification.
Well, it's actually weird because he's saying like Bruegel has depicted the natural world, specifically chosen it as a proxy for the fallen angels. I wouldn't consider because in this, the angels, say, the Archangel Michael or Michael is he's represented as a human, so he's saying the angels are the humans and the natural world are the fallen angels. The humans are part of the natural world. Yeah. So I would actually say that that's the opposite in a way, where he's kind of drawing a dichotomy, and it's like, we are part of nature, it's kind of like when Neil deGrasse Tyson, who, it's interesting, before we started recording, I was just talking to you about his comments about how we might live in a simulation or something. And he has some tweet once that was like, the universe doesn't care about you. And someone replied, it's like, well, we're part of the universe, so it's the same kind of thing of this objectification of the natural world, but somehow separating us from it. So that's what I would say is almost going on here. And it's weird because, he's saying that those are the demons, but it almost seems like he, doesn't really have, he's kind of charmed by the demons in a way. Those nasty little pincers.
The curious chimeras.
The cute little Jin that's coming to sting you with its egg pincer,
Yep. Yeah, don't let his little pincers get you. Yeah, no, I mean I think he is
cute Gucci goo AIDS,
I think he's he maybe, I don't know if scientists like that do gain of function research develop emotional attachments to their
I feel like there's a little bit of that bleeding through here, to be honest.
I mean, he is kind of a creator of them, and they are his little babies, aren't they? And he's got to protect his babies no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, I actually love bats. I think bats are very cute, and they're mammals. They have wings. They're unique. People love animals. People love nature, and I also definitely do agree in principle with the idea that we are part of our environment. You can't separate us from our environment. If you poison the air or whatever, it's going to affect human beings. That is true.
But it also applies to fucking gain of function research.
Yeah,
you know
exactly.
What I mean? If everything affects everything, man, then you doing things to insert a furin cleavage site into a fucking bat virus to make it infect humans, I think that would qualify as being part of the cybernetic web of life and nature.
Yeah, and
it's such a weird blind spot.
But this is so weird because it's this is almost this analysis kind of is it's one thing to be these dangerous things emerge from the natural world as a result of our behavior, but it's almost he kind of wants to reconcile with the demons, almost that AIDS is we just need to understand AIDS or something we just need to shake hands with AIDS and figure have a sit down and figure out what's wrong, because it's just part of the capital N capital W natural world.
We need to unite with AIDS against the real problem, which is I don't know, disease itself or something. Mine.
Yeah, Michael is at the mercy of the tooth and nail of glycoproteins, sharpened and honed to strike with. That's not my interpretation. It definitely seems like the glycoproteins are not winning. I don't know. I just feel like this is obviously it's a very tendentious reading, and I feel like this must have been some kind of weird conference where they were doing scientists interpret paintings or something like that.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, it was in his magazine that he edits, so he's the editor-in-chief of EcoHealth
maybe
magazine.
He did some kind of special issue on this topic, or he just he did choose a topic, and this is just such a weird reading where there's something weird about it. I guess he is kind of saying that they are dangerous, but it kind of is at odds with the whole idea of the natural world is part of us. He's saying that man and nature in a way separate, but they're kind of not.
They're not. It's also it's curious that because you dug this up is New York Times opinion piece that he was talking in this weird way about chimeric viruses, and then you found the thing about disease X. And his op-ed from February 2020, we knew Disease X was coming. It's here now. So maybe before we get out of here, I'll just read this, where I don't know, is he talking about his baby here? I don't know. He said, in early 2018, during a meeting of the WHO in Geneva, a group of experts I belong to, the R&D Blueprint, coined the term Disease X. We were referring to the next pandemic, which would be caused by an unknown novel pathogen that hadn't yet entered the human population. As the world stands today on the edge of the pandemic precipice, it's worth taking a moment to consider whether COVID-19 is the disease our group was warning about. Disease X, we said back then, would likely result from a virus originating in animals and would emerge somewhere on the planet where economic development drives people and wildlife together. Disease X would probably be confused with other diseases early in the outbreak and would spread quickly and silently, exploiting networks of human travel and trade. It would reach multiple countries in port containment. Disease X would have a mortality rate higher than a seasonal flu, but would spread as easily as the flu. It would shake financial markets even before it achieved pandemic status. In a nutshell, COVID-19 is Disease X. I mean, and then he goes on in this article basically to say, that he gives that kind of ecological explanation for how we can stop and do prevention, which of course means make vaccines. We're going to have to make a vaccine, and also some shit about don't do climate change as much or something like that. Yeah, and he mentions constantly that doing preparatory investment before a pandemic starts gives you a 9-to-1 economic return in the money you save when you successfully fight the thing. He also says here, he makes his little subtle pitch. As COVID-19 strikes today and a spate of other pathogens are ready to emerge in the future, we continue to butt up against nature, lowercase n here. Scientists estimate there are 1.6 million unknown viruses.
Well, it's not his magazine, so probably
he
they
can't
were like,
do it.
This is not formatting
NYT
properly.
formatting.
You're right.
Yeah, it said there's 1.67 million unknown viruses of the type that have previously emerged in people. Discovering and sequencing them should be a priority. A simple case of know your enemy. He also loves defense language, talking about this. In the aftermath of SARS, research on coronaviruses originating in bats has discovered more than 50 related viruses, some of which have the potential to infect people. This information can now be used to test for broad actions, vaccines, and drugs. Scaling up this effort to cover all viral families, as the Global Virome Project proposes to do, is a logical first step towards prevention. Yeah. And then he says the money line at the end, which other people have noticed. He says at the end of this op-ed, pandemics are like terrorist attacks. We know roughly where they originate and what's responsible for them, but we don't know exactly when the next one will happen. They need to be handled the same way, by identifying all possible sources and dismantling those before the next pandemic strikes.
No,
okay, all right, a war on disease, the endless war on disease.
He did explicitly say, I don't know if it was him, but it was in one, I think it might have been him, in one sort of piece about Disease X. He said, Disease X could be a bioweapon. It probably won't be, but it could be. WHO hedged its bets.
Yeah, and it was, what is Disease X? Yeah, I guess this wasn't him, but it was Amesh Adalja, I guess. Right. Mainstream medical articles have suggested Disease X might come from a bioweapon from North Korea or Syria, but many experts agree that it will be zoonotic, most likely a virus. Amesh Adalja, senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins University Center for Health Security, told the BMJ Disease X is likely to be a respiratory spread virus with the highest pandemic potential, which would make it very hard for public health measures to intervene. Yeah. We failed to avoid
it's
it.
Like this whole gang, the EcoHealth gang, really feels like the PNAC of COVID. It would be so great if something could happen, or it would be so bad if this happened, because then we'd all get billions of dollars and get to do everything we ever wanted to do, and then all these billionaires can fund us.
We get to have our amazing, fun, war in heaven. Our exciting little
I think he wants the world to burn.
Pincers.
He wants his little babies to run around the world and spread
that's
the gospel.
That's the unfortunate thing, and I think that you kind of see it with it's actually almost in a way. Well, I won't say it's worse, but it's definitely analogous to some of these bloodthirsty freaks, someone like a John Bolton or a Michael Flynn, where they're
Michael Scheuer.
Yeah, exactly.
You gotta kill Osama bin Laden. I don't care if you kill civilians. Who cares?
They love war so much that they want. Or Rumsfeld is actually a great thing, where even in that book by Midge Decter, you can't hide how happy, the energy of his happiness after 9/11, and it's the same thing for these people. It's their life's work. It's their love. So they're kind of not upset. They're kind of having a good time. This is great.
This is
for
what
them.
they've always wanted.
Yeah.
Last thing, did you happen to watch any of the Indian cable TV segments?
I watched
because
it.
those are like those are the only news sources like in English that are even kind of talking about. Maybe there's like some Epic Times bullshit, but in terms of like a cable news channel like talking about it, they're kind of the only. It's like the BJP Modi people are like definitely all about like hammering. Maybe because like I don't know, they're. Like you think, I don't know, they're attacking both. They're definitely attacking Peter Daszak as a sus lord, and they found a clip from a presentation. I wasn't able to find. Of course, they don't label it, so you can't look it up yourself. But it is him talking about over like a very like agitated Indian narrator.
Yeah, right.
But he basically brags about creating a quote like killer virus in 2016.
Yeah.
Let me see what his exact quote. He said, "You insert the spike protein. See if it binds to humans. Each step, you get closer to this virus could be pathogenic to humans." And I think he said, like, we did it. Well, not me, but like the researchers in China that we're partnered with have done this. Like, and blah, blah, blah. He just kind of mentions casually. So, like, again, it's like kind of basically admitting it, like kind of, like a lot of things we talk about, like sometimes not actually like hidden. Like a thing you might think is a smoking gun is something that somebody might just say out in public and like, because of the milieu they're in and because the media never jumps on it, they don't care. Like he can go write all these weird articles about like, you know, chimera angels like rising up from the deep and how he loves them.
I mean, I feel like they have a little bit like it's like a little bit of duping delight going on, and you can catch like, you know, you can catch that sometimes with people who like have a little bit, you know, it's kind of like when people like maybe, or people who came to mind was like someone like Nick Fuentes, you know, like he will be like, you millennials must learn to use irony, you know, you can't just say that you're a fascist, you know, but I do wonder how many cookies you could bake in an oven, you know, something like that, you know, like, and it's like, we get it, but like they have a little bit of joy out of like, you know, that you can't quite catch me, you know.
I get that big energy from Peter Daszak for sure in kind of everything. Though, I mean, he's just failed up. Same with Fauci. Fauci does the same kind of shit too. And, you know, he's somebody that some people are accusing him of lying to Congress, which, definitely in spirit he did, but is still in charge of the whole thing. You know, at like 80 years old, like that guy definitely knows where all the bodies are buried. And I really think he is kind of the, you know, maybe in different ways, but it's like the J. Edgar Hoover of like American public health policy and probably like the bio warfare industrial complex, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know, it's just more Pentagon money well spent, I suppose. But I guess we could probably leave it there.
Yeah. Not to be negative. But he's going to kill your entire family.
He is literally, Alex Jones literally is saying everybody that gets the COVID vaccine is going to die within the next 6 months to like 3 years. Like, you're already dead. You know, fingers crossed. It just kind of sucks and doesn't, you know, kill everybody. It does seem like a not a good plan for the globalists. Like, why would you kill everybody?
To leave only the patriots.
Leave only the patriots left over, unless
slaves.
it's a right wing like wacko plot the entire time, and like Daszak's hero Donald Rumsfeld, like he's avenging him from beyond the grave, and you know all that stuff. But I think more likely these nefarious billionaires are using this for their great reset in a kind of synergistic way, and also like manipulating us socially and instituting a new regime of like biocontrol over all of our lives that can be justified by like an extraordinary crisis, which is perfectly calibrated to be kind of deadly enough to take it seriously, but not so deadly. There's still ambiguity about it, and then everyone can fight with each other, and then people start looking at unvaccinated people like they're the demons in that painting that Daszak is obsessed with. And that's probably not a good place to be for us. So, you know, I guess we'll leave it there. It is a dark winter. It has been the DARPA winter has not ceased.
We're about to go into our second dark winter.
Yep. And I don't know what else to say, but, you know, look into these people, be sussed out by them. That can only be a positive development for your life. And until next time.
Watch out for those nasty pinchers.
Yeah, watch out for those nasty pinchers, those curious chimeras.
Yes.
And until next time, dear listeners, stay vigilant.
Peace.
Global controls will have to be imposed, and a world governing body will be created to enforce them. Crises precipitate change.
Secretly plotting your demise. I want to devise a virus to bring dire straits to your environment. Crush your corporations with a mild touch. Trash the whole computer system and revert you to papyrus. I want to make a super virus strong enough to cause blackouts in every single metropolis. Cause they don't want to unify us, so fuck it. Total anarchy and can nobody stop us. You see, late in the evening, fucked up on my computer and my mind starts roaming. I create like a heathen. The first cycles of this virus like a sin through a modem. Infiltration hit your station. No Microsoft or enhanced DOS will impede. Society thinks they're safe when bingo, hard drive crashes from the rending. A lot of hackers tried viruses before. Vaporize your text like so much whiteout. I want it where file replication is a chore. Lights out, shut down entire White House. I don't want just a bug that could be corrected. I'm erecting immaculate design. Break the nation down section by section. Even to the greatest minds, it's impossible to find. I want to devise a virus to bring dire straits to your environment. Crush your corporations with a mild touch. Trash the whole computer system and revert you to papyrus. I want to devise a virus to bring dire straits to your environment. Crush your corporations with a mild touch. Trash the whole computer system and revert you to papyrus.
I have already planned. The plan is programmed into every one of my 1,000 robots. We will not hesitate. We will destroy the Homo sapiens. Please stay where you are.
I'm making some shit in my basement. Don't tell him no. I want to develop a super virus, better by far than an old Y2K. This is 3030, the time of global unification. Break right through they terminals, burn them all, slaves to silicon. Corrupt politicians with leaders and their keywords. FBI and spies stealing bombs, dissipate their plans in their face and catch the fever. Everybody loot the stores, get your canned goods. Even space stations are having a hard time. Peacekeepers seek to take our manhood, which results in the form of global apartheid. Ghettos are trash dumps with gas pumps, exploded and burnt out since before the Great Union. The last punks walk around like mass monks, ready to manipulate the database or break through them. Human rights come in 100th place. Mass production has always been number one. New Earth has become a repugnant place, so it's time to spread the fear that's fun to some.
Too long have we tried to extend our glorious empire out to the stars, only to be driven back.
I want to devise a virus to bring dire straits to your environment. Crush your corporations with a mild touch. Trash the whole computer system and revert you to papyrus. I want to devise a virus to bring dire straits to your environment. Crush your corporations with a mild touch. Trash the whole computer system and revert you to papyrus.